Hogwarts, Harley from the Which Way by author Shimo Nuha Lie. Chapter 371-390. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And those who want to support me, I have a Patreon channel, get early access to video on Patreon. 371. Why does such a handsome person have a mouth? Harley was frantically trying to recall Aquaman's Self-Cultivation, a book she hadn't used in a long time and was almost forgotten, while simultaneously feeling that she might be in for a bad day. Unexpectedly, her beloved godfather Sirius suddenly interrupted and pulled Harley back. "Hermione, are you sure you don't know who that is?" Sirius, his face covered in oil from eating, still managed to peek over, his expression revealing confusion. "You two have lived together in Hogwarts for almost a year. How could you not know her? And, wait, let me think about it." To the astonishment of almost all the Order of the Phoenix members around him, Sirius suddenly clapped his hands, his expression turning excited. "Oh right, I remember now, you clearly recognized that witch's name as Fleur Delacour at a glance during the summer vacation. You were so anxious back then, you couldn't wait to get Muggle's documents sorted out and take that big steel bird called an airplane to Spain to find Harley. It took us a lot of effort to persuade you to stay calm, so how could you, oh dear." Before Sirius could finish speaking, Lupin, who had just come to his senses, slapped him on the back of the head and forced a piece of beef into his mouth. Lupin also glared at Sirius, as if to say, "Can't you shut up even if you're eating meat?" The members of the Order of the Phoenix nearby also cast strange glances, even Professor Dumbledore shook his head, and Mrs. Weasley couldn't help but sigh and rub her forehead. No wonder this distant relative is still single, even though she is already a mother of so many children. Even though he had good relationships with so many witches and was well informed, he had never heard from anyone that Sirius had any scandals with Hogwarts. At the time, Arthur and I couldn't understand it at all. After all, a handsome boy like Sirius, who was also very popular at school, should have been as sought after and welcomed as James Potter. However, after working with Sirius for a month, especially after the banquet at noon today, Mrs. Weasley suddenly understood everything. It's fair to say that there's a reason why some people remain single. Why does someone who's so handsome only have a mouth? Black, the old principal, and Sirius's elderly mother, who had appeared on the wall at some unknown time, looked even more worried. After Regulus's death, they had placed all their hopes for continuing the House of Black on Sirius. Now it seems, "I should just wash up and go to sleep, anything can happen in dreams." Although Sirius has been righteously suppressed by Lupin, his words still echo in Hermione's ears. Hermione's face turned bright red instantly, and she lowered her head, unable to utter a single word. As for the interrogation of Harley, it naturally had to come to an end. Hermione would have to wait until the evening to have another chance to torture him. However, Harley also planned to give Hermione a good torture tonight because of Hermione's previous attack on her. So, who will torture whom in the end, that depends on their skills. The birthday party lasted for a full 2 hours. Towards the end of the banquet, Mrs. Weasley brought out a huge cream cake with a golden red lion painted on it and icing. Fred and George were delighted to see the cake, as they had been quiet throughout the entire banquet and it was time for them to do something special. Most of the people present were adults, so it was not appropriate to play pranks. Among those minors, Harley is the two's most beloved major shareholder, Hermione is expected to become the boss's wife in the future, and Ginny is their most beloved younger sister. These are the people the Weasley twins are unwilling to deal with. So, the ultimate target is you. Come out, Ron. Ron was happily munching on a chicken leg in one hand and a lamb chop in the other. His cake was placed in front of him, to be enjoyed after the meal. Suddenly, the Weasley twins pulled out 2 firecrackers, saying they wanted to set off fireworks one last time before the party ended, and also to showcase their latest product. Everyone's attention was drawn to the two of them, and Ron was no exception. As the fireworks exploded in midair, a golden Gryffindor emblem appeared on the ceiling, with a lion holding a snake in its mouth and standing on a dark mark. Everyone was amazed by the idea, but Professor Dumbledore suggested to the two that the lion be replaced with all the animals on the Hogwarts school crest, each stepping on a dark mark, and that the idea of the snake in the lion's mouth be removed. Only Ron suddenly sensed that something was wrong. 2 transparent hands suddenly appeared on the back of his head and shoved Ron's head hard into the cake. Fred and George realized their magic gadgets had worked, and they grinned smugly, flicking their sleeves to let a pair of gloves slip into their pockets. "Fred, George, you're playing pranks on your brother again. Despite the lack of direct evidence, Mrs. Weasley immediately identified the culprit based on her absolute trust in Ron's inability to waste food and her absolute trust in the Weasley twins' pranks. But the Weasley twins blinked and looked at Mrs. Weasley with an innocent expression. "Mom, we didn't do anything." That's right, it was clearly little Ronnie who wanted to enjoy the feeling of having his face covered in cream. The few Order of the Phoenix members present, whose magic skills were average, scratched their heads in confusion since they hadn't discovered anything either. Professor Dumbledore and Shax grinned, having seen through the Weasley twins' little trick. However, they did not choose to expose it. After all, if they didn't play pranks, would they still be Gryffindor? Mrs. Weasley ultimately didn't punish the two. After all, even Ron thought burying his face in the cream was quite fun, probably a side effect of being teased by the Weasley twins. The birthday party ended amidst laughter and joy. The members of Order of the Phoenix quickly cleaned up the living room and then got busy with their work. Professor Dumbledore left Grimmauld Place immediately to attend an internal Wizengamot meeting. Harley felt a bit embarrassed that Professor Dumbledore was so busy, since she was the one who caused Dumbledore to be running around all the time. The professor is so busy now mainly because he has revealed the fact that Lord Voldemort has been resurrected. And clearly, too many ordinary wizards prefer to be cowards. They would rather deny it, pretend it never happened, than face the reality they fear. Furthermore, with many pure-blooded families attempting to stir up trouble through a media war, ordinary wizards are becoming increasingly confused, unsure of whom to believe. Harley's decision to have Rita publish the news and photos in the newspaper was a powerful blow to the entire wizarding world, forcing many to gradually accept reality. However, some people still disagree, arguing that the photos are fabricated evidence. The only way to quickly unify the wizarding world's opinions is for Lord Voldemort to show his face and cause a major incident, such as an open attack on the Ministry of Magic. But right now, Lord Voldemort is focused on farming, contacting the Wizard of Pure Blood, recalling his giants and dementors, and negotiating with the werewolf, vampire, and goblin resistance groups who hate the wizard. All of this was done to deliver a grand gift to Harley on Christmas, an attempt to strangle Harley in Azkaban. So Lord Voldemort doesn't have time to show his face and cause trouble right now. Seeing how diligently others were working towards their promotion ceremony, and considering that Harley hadn't even completed a fifth of her covert infiltration and control over Lord Voldemort, she naturally couldn't bear to disturb him. Since that's the case, I guess I'll just have to put up with Professor Dumbledore's hardship again, and treat it as a workout. Sirius, on the other hand, was bored out of his mind, having been cooped up in the house for so long that he was almost going crazy. Unfortunately, just as he was about to chat with Harley a little longer, he was pulled away from the living room. Given his behavior at the banquet, Lupin decided to take him to a room in Grimmauld Place for a proper brotherly talk. Phineas and Old Lady Black naturally followed, hoping to take the opportunity to teach Sirius a lesson. Although the Godfather had helped him earlier, Harley could only say that there was nothing he could do to help. After praying for the professor for a few seconds, Harley and Hermione went back upstairs to open the gifts and chat with the Weasley twins about the store's recent developments. The room Harley used to live in has been cleaned up and is now a double room for Harley and Hermione. Fred leaned back in the newly conjured chair, fiddling with a pair of gloves. "Are these the gloves you used to prank Ron just now?" Harley asked with interest. "That's right." George nodded, picked up a glove, and put it on his right hand. "Let me demonstrate for you." As he spoke, he recited a spell. The gloves remained unchanged, but a hand appeared in midair. "We'll name it the Invisible Hand." Fred patted the treasure in his hand. "You've seen the effect, it can remotely conjure a magic hand for pranks. Currently, we can also make the hand invisible, making the prank even more effective." George's conjured hand also went into stealth mode, then reappeared from midair. "Very interesting." Harley took the glove Fred handed her, turning it over to admire it, while Hermione leaned over as well. Harley's expression was initially very casual, but as she noticed certain details, she gradually became serious. "Have you made just this one pair of gloves?" "Of course not," Fred waved his hand. "This is a fully mature sample, and we have prepared 6 more sets of the same sample. If you like them, these gloves are yours." "Thank you very much." Harley carefully put the gloves away, an idea taking shape in her mind. "If I were to encounter Chaos Sea or River of Eternal Darkness in the future, ensuring my own safety would be a major concern. After all, if you only want to use clones or certain objects for remote detection, you also have to be constantly on guard against these remote methods being corrupted and developing their own consciousness." However, the gloves worn by Fred and George feature 2 very intricately designed alchemy patterns, from which Harley vaguely drew some inspiration. "Perhaps I could design a similar magic ritual," combined with the status of the earthly angel and the concealment effect of the invisibility cloak, to temporarily conceal this influence from a higher level. Harley thought this method was worth a try. After putting away the gloves, Harley talked to the Weasley twins about the current state of the store. We were all planning to drop out of school, since we had enough money to rent a shop in Diagon Alley. But Dad convinced us, after all, making prank props also requires a lot of magic knowledge. So we should spend another year studying at Hogwarts to accumulate more skills. It was a wise choice. Joko didn't study hard back then and he lacked a lot of knowledge. So he has been selling frog egg soap and teapots that bite noses since he was 20 years old, and it is difficult for him to launch more new products. Harley casually gave the 2 examples while weighing the Love Handbook in her hand, a gift from an unknown wizard. The wizard also included a suggestive letter in the Love Handbook, clearly hoping Harley would give her a chance to use the tricks from the book on Harley. Harley wanted to open the book and take a closer look, to study it carefully. However, Hermione, who was sitting across from Harley on the bed, was quick-witted and snatched the book away, giving Harley a fierce glare. Harley could only sigh. With others around, she'd allow him to be arrogant for now. She'd deal with him tonight. After hearing Harley's words, Fred and George exchanged a glance and nodded together. Harley is absolutely right. It seems they'll have to put in extra effort this year to study and spend more time in the library. By the way, where are Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape today? After Harley opened the gift bag Professor Snape had given her, she casually asked Hermione about it. Professor Snape and Professor McGonagall are both busy. Hermione discreetly slipped away several greeting cards that she deemed inappropriate. As for what they're busy with, we have no idea. As minors, the adults refuse to tell us much. Actually, this is quite unfair. We're both adults, but Mom doesn't want us to join the Order of the Phoenix, Fred said, shaking his head in dissatisfaction. After all, war kills people. Harley's words hit the nail on the head. I remember Mrs. Weasley had 2 older brothers, but they both died in the last Wizard War. That's probably why she doesn't want all of you to join the Order of the Phoenix. Fred and George were taken aback, their expressions turned serious, and they remained silent. Harley smiled silently. This Wizard War should be relatively peaceful. Well, the premise is that those dark wizards aren't human, they're just materials for the ritual. Although nothing has happened yet, the seemingly peaceful wizarding world is actually rife with undercurrents. Those Death Eaters who had already been infected with the disease by Harley were unaware that they were being secretly watched by the earthly angel and were almost completely corrupted. They are also attempting to infiltrate the Ministry of Magic, or trying to contact various dark creatures. What hard-working employees. If they keep working hard, Harley could become Archangel by next year, no, by the end of this year. Is this the joy of being a capitalist? I love it. Opening parenthesis. End of this chapter. 372 The Giants of the Alps. For the rest of the summer, Professor Dumbledore barely showed up. The only time she appeared in the Order of the Phoenix's hall was to ask Harley if she would be willing to serve as this year's Gryffindor Perfect. Harley naturally took on this role without hesitation. As for who the male Perfect was, Professor Dumbledore didn't mention it, and Harley didn't ask any further questions. Besides, Harley spent the rest of her time with Hermione in the archives of Grimmauld Place. Ignoring the displeasure of his beloved ancestor Phineas, Sirius waved his hand and allowed all members of the Order of the Phoenix to freely borrow magical ancient books from the Black family's library. Phineas almost got into a fight with Sirius over this. After all, these were books that the House of Black had treasured for hundreds of years. Phineas was already somewhat displeased when Sirius allowed Harley and Hermione to enter. In the end, the old Black principal comforted himself with the reason that he was a descendant of the Harley Potter family and Sirius's godson, which made him feel somewhat at ease. Now Sirius has pulled this stunt again, casually displaying the library to outsiders for reading. For Phineas, a traditional pure-blooded individual with a deep connection to the Black, this is quite a shock. This is completely unacceptable to Wizard. Of course, Phineas eventually realized that he had been worrying far too much. Adult wizards all have their own tasks to do, and when they finally get a break, they want to relax rather than come back to study hard. Meanwhile, Mrs. Weasley, who has lived in Grimmauld Place for a long time, is busy every day designing even better dishes. Ron would rather play wizard chess with himself or struggle with his summer homework than step into this place. In the end, only Harley, Hermione, and the Weasley twins frequented this place, while Ginny came only occasionally, and when she did, she would only study the evil curse. Although Harley herself was still sitting there reading books, her main focus was no longer on the subject. Alps, in a forest. An expedition team of many Muggle enthusiasts is trekking through the woods along an unofficial route. Won't we be in danger doing this? Looking at the snow on the mountain that hadn't melted even in the summer, a white female college student frowned and asked. What are you afraid of? The leading male college student brandished the submachine gun in his hand. I even brought out all of my father's collection of submachine guns, along with a lot of magazines. This was originally a high-grade item supplied to the army. If it weren't for my father's influence, he wouldn't even be qualified to collect it. And in this desolate wilderness, at most a leopard or a tiger might appear, and at most a few bears would be quite a sight. How many bullets can those beasts withstand? If things really get dangerous, we can always ask the government for help, another boy said nonchalantly. Those rescue teams are paid by our taxpayers, so they should serve us. The blonde girl standing nearby also mocked the girl who had spoken earlier. If you're scared, go back. It's not the first time you've been this cowardly. The girl took a deep breath, about to retort, when she suddenly stopped in her tracks. To be precise, the entire group stopped in their tracks, their eyes glazed over. A gentle breeze swept by, and the expedition team seemed to remember something important. They immediately changed direction and headed down the mountain. Their eyes gradually regained their liveliness and vitality, almost exactly the same as before, without any abnormality. Only the boy in the lead had a single, glistening grain of sand on his shoulder. The sand was inconspicuous and quickly disappeared into the gaps in the clothes. Suddenly, an eye opened on the boy's back, scanned the area, and then slowly closed again. However, the other boy walking behind him was completely oblivious to this and continued chatting and laughing with his girlfriend. If the expedition team had taken a few more steps, they would have run into a large tree. This tree is over 50 meters tall, standing out prominently among the surrounding trees, which average no more than 5 meters in height. Even if you climb to the top of the mountain, you can see this peculiar tree at a glance. However, the Muggle expedition seemed to be blinded by something and were completely unaware of its existence. On a branch of this large tree, Hedwig proudly flapped its wings, showing off its achievement to its master beside it. Sister Harley, how did my psychological invisibility and hypnosis techniques go? It's all right, at least it didn't embarrass me. Harley's legs swayed, her shoes hanging on her toes, wobbling slightly as if they might fall off at any moment. She patted the little owl's head beside her, offering Hedwig encouragement. Hedwig immediately raised its head proudly and flapped its wings twice. Don't get too cocky, Harley said with a laugh, noticing Hedwig's apparent pride. Those were just a group of ordinary people. Any ordinary Sequence 6 hypnotist could have completed your previous task. Not to mention that you are now a Sequence 5 Dreamwalker, you should have higher expectations for yourself. When it's time to capture Giant, you'll be in charge of doing it yourself. Me. Hedwig's smile froze instantly. She tilted her head and said, somewhat stammering, Sister Harley, this important task, you should do it yourself. If I were to ruin your promotion ceremony, then it would be. Accompanied by Hedwig's slightly exaggerated scream, Harley withdrew his right hand in annoyance. Stop pretending, do you want to get a tap on the head? Harley said irritably as the little snowy owl continued to play the victim. You can't handle a single giant. Those giants only have the power of Sequence level 5 at most. Moreover, they don't have the extraordinary abilities of the warrior path. At most, they are just tough and have high resistance to magic, but they are relatively weak in terms of soul and spirit. Your spectator pathway, your dream travel ability alone completely counters him. Seeing that he could not escape his fate of being relegated to the first match, Hedwig had no choice but to accept reality. Let's go, this is the last magic node. Harley gently patted the tree trunk beside her, and a green witch's mark instantly appeared on the tree before vanishing without a trace. Harley lightly shook her toes, and her previously wobbly black leather shoes were instantly put on. At the same time, she gently pushed the tree trunk with both hands, and jumped down from the air, stretching her body to her heart's content. A gust of wind blew through the woods, transforming into an invisible hand that supported Harley, helping her fly forward. Hedwig flapped his wings hurriedly, chasing after Harley. In the snow at the foot of a ridge in the rolling mountains. There sat a group of enormous, ugly humanoid creatures. They are about 20 feet tall, with the tallest reaching a full 25 feet. Beneath that thick, yellowish-brown hair were round little heads and even smaller eyes that revealed stupidity and tyranny. At this moment, the largest giant was sitting next to a small campfire, holding a stick with an unskinned wild boar skewered on it. The giants nearby stared intently at the wild boar, their mouths watering. However, glancing at the massive iron rod that was the only one in the entire tribe beside their leader, the giants swallowed hard, too afraid to try and steal it. Perhaps overwhelmed by the aroma, several giants suddenly stood up, but instead of charging at their leader, they rammed into the elderly giant beside them. Although the elderly giant is old, his brutality remains undiminished, and he fiercely retaliates. Moments later, large patches of scarlet appeared on the pristine white snow. Above this ridge, Harley lay on a magic cloud, while Hedwig stood on her shoulder. Is this all the giant we have? Hedwig flapped his wings regretfully. At just over 100, how could such a small race possibly support a Sequence 1 ritual? It doesn't matter. These uncouth creatures are just extras. Harley coldly watched the horrific massacre of her own kind unfolding below. Bloody violence, mindless, even when their race is on the verge of extinction, they still don't know how to unite, they only know how to kill each other without any purpose. I remember that according to some pure-blood family records, there were more than 800 giants that left Britain, but now only 100 are left due to infighting. I feel disgusted to think that such a race would be used as the main material for the ritual of ascending to Archangel. So what should we do next? Hedwig stopped complaining and asked obediently. Are we just going to lie here and wait for the giants to get separated? No need to wait. Harley stood up from the cloud, the color of the white cloud beneath her feet gradually changing. The wind is rising, the clouds are gathering, and it's getting dark. It's time for a downpour. With a deafening clap of thunder, a torrential downpour mixed with hail instantly blanketed the earth. Below, the giant leader was tearing off the charred skin of the wild boar and stuffing it into his mouth, revealing the still bloody raw meat inside. The heavy rain poured down on him squarely, prompting the giant leader to roar in anger. However, his not-so-bright mind could still figure out that he couldn't control these weather changes. So the giant leader, holding a wild boar in one hand and a steel bar in the other, charged madly toward a cave. Meanwhile, the giants around them rushed toward the empty cave, and a small-scale battle even broke out. Moments later, all the caves were filled to the brim, and the two already injured elderly giants suffered further aggravation of their injuries. Their limbs were bleeding, and they lay on the ground in pain, groaning weakly. However, these elderly giants seemed somewhat lucky, as the hail completely bypassed them, allowing them to catch their breath. In addition, there were a dozen or so giants that were still able to move around but had nowhere to go and could not withstand the hail attack, so they could only use wooden sticks to protect their heads and run frantically in all directions. One giant was very lucky, he only got hit twice on the back of the head by hailstones before he managed to escape the rainstorm. Giant shook his head, satisfied, and walked to a big tree to lie down. Although the hail and rain didn't cause him much harm, they did make him feel very uncomfortable. As the most notorious dwarf in the entire giant tribe, only slightly taller than another 16-foot-tall dwarf named Grop, he was not entitled to a good place to live. He was already very content just being able to lie under the tree. After Giant lay down, he suddenly felt extremely tired. He heard birds chirping all around him. Normally, he would have been excited to go hunting, but now all he wanted to do was sleep. Giant finally closed his eyes, and soon a thunderous snoring sound filled the snow. A snowy owl flapped its wings and appeared in midair, staring disgustedly at the filthy giant below. After a moment's hesitation, the owl swooped down and struck Giant's head. However, no collision occurred. The moment the two came into contact, the owl's body became somewhat ethereal and merged directly into it. Less than 10 minutes later, the little owl flew out again, its face full of grief and indignation. Is it finished? Harley appeared quietly and asked with interest. It's done. The hypnotic seed has been planted, Hedwig said quickly. But I'll never do this kind of work again. I'd rather fight Dragon head on. Why? Harley blinked. Originally, you were going to go through a fierce battle, but now I've lowered the difficulty, so you'll only have to face the sleeping giant. That's because you have no idea what that filthy giant is thinking. Hedwig interrupted Harley for the first time. He actually dreamed of eating live wild boar, 3 bites at a time, in front of all the giants, making them all incredibly envious. That's not the point. The point is you don't know how big his mouth was in the dream. His mouth was 3 times the size of his head, it's not magical at all. Harley burst out laughing, even laughing so hard her stomach hurt, and didn't have time to comfort Hedwig. Hedwig glared angrily at its owner, flapped its wings twice, and scurried up a tree. What a pitiful child, he hasn't seen enough and lacks experience. Harley finally stopped laughing, shook her head, walked up to Giant, and adjusted her glasses. Get up, you big oaf. Harley gently stepped on Giant's face, and although she didn't use much force, it felt as if a terrifying bell was ringing in Giant's ears. Ah! Giant woke up instantly and leapt to his feet. Harley wasn't knocked down by him, Instead, she spun around in midair before landing steadily on the ground. Giant paused for a moment when he saw Harley, and instinctively tried to raise his stick. But a glint of silver light flashed in his eyes. After a moment, Giant seemed to remember something, slowly knelt down, and said in broken English, word by word, with great difficulty. This servant, Gao Gaoma, greets Master Guj. Opening parenthesis. End of this chapter. 373 Heading towards Britain. Harley was puzzled when she heard the way the giant horse addressed her, before she remembered that Gugo was the title of the giant leader. But Master Gugo, what strange grammar. Harley stopped thinking about it and coldly gestured, get up. The tall horse slowly stood up. Harley looked him up and down a few times and couldn't help but frown. After all, Giant is only 18 feet tall, which is not even a passing grade in Giant's class, and he has no competitiveness whatsoever. After a moment's thought, Harley raised her hand and waved. Wait here for a few minutes, I'll be right back. As soon as she finished speaking, her figure exploded, turning into countless streams of light that disappeared into the ice beneath the ground. A hint of confusion flashed in Gao Gaoma's eyes, but he still obeyed his master's command and waited obediently there. About 10 minutes later, Harley's figure reappeared in the same spot. A mirror floated above her head, from which spit out large numbers of rabbits, wild boars, and deer. Dinner is served. Eat as much as you can, eat all you want. Harley snapped her fingers, and a red glint flashed in Gao Gaoma's eyes. He roared to the sky and quickly grabbed the animals he had just caught and stuffed them into his mouth. Gao Gaoma's stomach seemed to have become a bottomless pit, able to hold any amount of food. If someone could see through Gogoma's skin to his stomach, they would find that Gogoma's digestive system is terrifyingly efficient. The food was immediately digested to the maximum extent as soon as it entered his stomach, and then converted into energy to supply all parts of his body. Meanwhile, Gao Gaoma's muscles and bones defied the laws of nature, growing continuously and making him taller and stronger. As time went by, Gago's size gradually reached Giant's average level, then increased wildly, eventually settling at 26 feet. Stop! Harley's voice rang out as Tall Horse, having just finished eating the venison, was about to reach for the next rabbit. However, he obediently lowered his hand and awaited Harley's orders. Fantastic, fantastic. Harley looked Giant up and down. Now, return to your group and fight for Gugo's position. I will support you from behind the scenes. I won't let you down, my great master. Gao Gaoma knelt down respectfully, and his English became increasingly fluent. Oh, right. Harley suddenly remembered something. That 16-foot-tall little giant, seems to be related to Hagrid by blood. Their mother should both be that most brutal female giant in history, Fredwafa. Well then, Gao Gao Ma, could you please take care of Grop a little? Although somewhat confused, Gao Gaoma nodded and chose to obey Harley's will. The tall horse quickly left, while Harley stood alone in place. Judging by the time, those Death Eaters should be arriving soon, at the latest by noon tomorrow. Harley leaned against that big tree today. I hope that leaving them this gift will make them happy. A flash of green light, and Harley vanished without a trace. However, the leaves of this big tree seem to be more lush, and an extra branch has grown at the top of the tree, a smooth and neat branch that can be picked off to make wand materials. In a Muggle village in a Muggle country near the Arctic Circle. As night fell, the fishermen hurried home with their bountiful catch, while the village was already filled with the aroma of beer and fried fish. This village is extremely quiet, rarely disturbed by outsiders, let alone experiencing any strange or unnatural phenomena. However, dozens of meters below the village, a huge underground cavity was brightly lit. This is a goblin settlement, but not the Goblin of Gringotts. It is the territory of goblin who are dissatisfied with the wizard rulers and also deeply resent the Gringotts and the current leaders of the goblin tribe. They carved out a complex underground labyrinth here, the end of which is this underground void. At this moment, many goblins were circling around the huge furnace, and a large number of goblins were constantly banging on a giant suit of armor. Around the cave, many goblin were hammering away at the walls with shovels, knocking down ore, and using magic to reinforce the cave ceiling. A wizard in black robes was carrying a wand and patrolling with Goblin's squad leader. Seemingly because of the high temperature emanating from the stove, he rolled up the sleeves of his robe, revealing the dark mark on his arm clearly. I never expected you guys to have such an iron mind hidden away. The Death Eater casually stroked the wall and couldn't help but sigh. Of course, we're not those damned traitors on the ground, Squad Leader Goblin said proudly. Those fools have betrayed Goblin's honor, thinking only of making money, but we haven't. We are ready to counterattack every moment, ready to defeat the current rulers of Wizard and reclaim our rights. Despite his proud expression, Goblin, the squad leader, looked at Death Eater with a hint of worry in his eyes. After all, Lord Voldemort's infamy was widespread in the underworld, and no one dared to underestimate such a powerful and ruthless villain. Therefore, these goblins with rebellious intentions did not dare to refuse his alliance. Moreover, Lord Voldemort offered them irresistible terms, granting them various rights in exchange for the goblins' support. However, Goblin also knew that cooperating with Lord Voldemort was tantamount to asking a tiger for its skin. If he was not careful, he would be devoured without a trace. Now they can only hope that you know who is trustworthy enough, and that the magic contract can restrain this Dark Lord, thus protecting their own interests. That's a truly lofty ideal. I believe you can definitely succeed. Death Eater's voice was unusually sincere, but a sinister smile appeared beneath the black mask. Although he obeyed the Dark Lord's orders to contact the radicals in Goblin and signed a pact. But this is nothing more than a superficial effort. Goblins want to gain a range of rights, including the right to use wand, to prove that they are now on equal footing with Wizard. But would the Pure Bloods grant them that right? The Pure Bloods' minds are far more sophisticated than those of ordinary Muggles. Wizard is more radical. In recent years, many Pure Bloods have proposed to completely erase Goblin to ensure that Wizard's rights are not usurped by outsiders. These goblins are nothing but cannon fodder. Once the Great Dark Lord rules the entire magic world, the goblins will be sent to hell to join those damned rebels. As for the contract, do you really think that such a low-quality magic contract can restrain the Great Dark Lord? Suddenly, a piercing sonic boom echoed through the air. Smack! A house elf landed on the ground, scurried over to Death Eater, and held a letter aloft with both hands. Dear member of the Knot family, great Mr. Knot, my master Malfoy has sent me with an urgent letter concerning the great work of Lord Dark Lord. Knot was about to get angry. As an ancient pure blood, he firmly believed that only a good house elf was one who did not appear before his master and could still serve him well. Any house elf of the Knot family who dared to appear before him without orders and show him that disgusting face would be tortured by Crucio. Now that Dobby has appeared before him, even if it's not one of his own house elf, Knot is going to give it a couple of lashes. However, Dobby's words captured Knot's entire attention. Let me see. Knot picked up the letter and quickly read its contents. Goblin, standing to the side, looked curious but didn't dare to ask any more questions. Knot quickly read the letter twice, then looked at Goblin beside him. Billick, the Dark Lord has sent an order requiring you to provide a helmet large enough for a 26-foot giant. If necessary, we will need to provide him with full armor later. Upon hearing that the armor the goblins had painstakingly crafted and were so proud of was to be worn by the giant, Goblin Billick's eyes darkened slightly. But this was, after all, part of the contract, so he nodded. We will build it as soon as possible, at the latest within 3 days. However, without Giant's image, we are afraid that our armor will not be able to fit perfectly. Let's focus on building the helmet first, there are still many uncertainties later. Knot shook his head and turned to look at Dobby. Slave of the Malfoy family, go back and report to your master. The goblins will be able to present the items your master needs within 3 days at the latest. Thank you for your reply, great pure blood, Wizard Knot. Dobby bowed respectfully, then disappeared again in a deafening sonic boom. However, no one noticed that there was a tiny particle on the ground where he had been standing. If you pick up that particle and examine it closely under a magnifying glass, you will find that it is a tiny mirror shrunk by extraordinary abilities. Knot and squad leader Goblin continued their patrol, and the dust disappeared from the spot. Deep within this underground labyrinth, several elderly goblins were gathered together, discussing something. Their expressions were slightly serious as they quickly communicated something in Goblin. Before the old goblins lay contracts or documents written in Goblin script. Several of the contracts and documents also have a dark mark at the end. At this moment, the black mark was emitting a greenish glow. Even though the room was brightly lit, the mark was still eerie and frightening. Suddenly, the room lights went out. What happened? The oldest goblin instinctively looked up at the ceiling and raised his hand. A light shone on his fingers. Lumos Goblin language. When old goblin saw the state of the room, he was instantly terrified. Because eyes opened up on the ceiling, the walls, and even on the table in front of us. Ah! Goblin's leadership let out a piercing scream, but their voices were firmly confined to the room. The magical light conjured by the goblins quickly disappeared, and before it completely vanished, large swaths of spider silk could be faintly seen spreading outwards. About 10 minutes later, the light came back on. The goblins were still sitting at the table, exchanging documents, just like before. However, there was a hint of confusion in their eyes, a manifestation that could only occur when their minds were mentally altered by the extraordinary abilities of Spectator Pathway. The Balkan Peninsula, Romania. In a desolate wilderness, a castle stands quietly. Logically speaking, a castle like this, existing deep in the mountains and forests, would naturally attract many fearless Muggle tourists to explore it. However, the castle was surrounded by a large patch of black mist, which successfully concealed it. Inside the castle, Professor Basilda Babarin, an ancient sorcerer from Hogwarts, sat on a luxurious sofa, holding a glass of dragon's blood whiskey. Opposite her sat an old vampire, exuding a strong aura of decay, whose old age could not be concealed even by his luxurious clothes. So, all the vampires will refuse any invitation from either side and will close castle and fall into slumber. Professor Babbling confirmed this with a serious expression. Of course, my dear daughter. The old vampire nodded. We are not like you, who have received the protection of Hogwarts and have eliminated most of your flaws. But we, well, you know, we're not in a good situation right now. So now the vampires in the castle are forced to spend most of their time sealed in coffins in order to slow down our aging. That doesn't sound like a real reason. Professor Babbling raised an eyebrow. It's understandable that they don't join Lord Voldemort's camp, after all, they have already recruited Werewolf. Noble vampires never cooperate with lowly Werewolf. But not cooperating with Professor Dumbledore. I don't understand, it's such a great opportunity for us to slaughter Werewolf. The old vampire hesitated for a few seconds, then tapped the table, and a layer of black mist instantly enveloped the two of them. We have sensed the will of Dracula's ancestors. Professor Babbling's eyes widened instantly. As time went by, the werewolf began to migrate. The giants also emerged from the Alps. The leader, a giant standing 26 feet tall, wore a helmet, was clad in sturdy armor, and carried a spiked club. However, one of the 16-foot giants in the group has disappeared. These giants traveled in broad daylight, but under the protection of the dark arts, they went unnoticed by the Ministry of Magic of any country. At a small harbor by the sea, several large ships were moored, ready for the werewolf and giants to travel to Great Britain. North Sea, Azkaban Island. The Dementors have been much quieter lately, and they've stopped going to the lowest levels of the prison. In the lowest building, each Death Eater had somehow changed into a fairly neat outfit, trimmed their nails, and hid a wand in the corner. Opening parenthesis. End of this chapter. 374 Sirius, what exactly did you do to Professor Snape back then? The seemingly peaceful holiday passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, the start of the new school term is just around the corner. With a week left before the start of the new school year, the school notice and shopping list finally arrived. This year, a minor incident occurred at the Ministry of Magic, which even affected the Wizarding Examinations Authority. So Hogwarts, professors are only now deciding which textbooks they need to purchase. Harley's letter also included an extra gold and red badge, the one symbolizing Hogwarts. Gryffindor is a badge for the female character, Perfect. Everyone at Grimmauld Place was unsurprised, since they couldn't think of anyone else besides Harley who was qualified to be Gryffindor's Perfect. Sirius and the Weasley twins, on the other hand, seemed unusually excited. Neither Sirius nor James had ever been the Perfect, and they would occasionally jokingly criticize the perfects of their class. Lupin is a model student, which doesn't fit the image of the Raiders Quartet. The Weasley twins have always maintained that only the world's biggest idiots would become Perfect and president of the male or female student council. However, once Harley became the Perfect, the title of Perfect in Gryffindor immediately became the most prestigious title in the eyes of Sirius and the Weasley twins. What? We used to complain about Perfect. Slander. This is pure slander. Someone is slandering us. In his excitement, Sirius also enthusiastically suggested taking the children to Diagon Alley as a way to relax. Of course, the real reason was that he hadn't been out for too long, and he was taking advantage of the opportunity given to him by his goddaughter to go out for a stroll. Mrs. Weasley appeared somewhat displeased upon hearing Sirius's suggestion. Sirius, I think it's safer for us adults to buy the books in the current situation. Diagon Alley is a mixed bag. What if a Death Eater suddenly jumps out and attacks the children? You're overthinking it, Molly. Sirius waved his hand. 2 months ago, Harley personally defeated Lord Voldemort head-on. So do you think any Death Eater would be so fearless as to jump out from behind the trash cans in Diagon Alley and attack us? But she's still a child, and Mrs. Weasley was about to say something when Lupin silently appeared in the hall. I can come along too, that way, we can ensure our safety to the greatest extent, Lupin said softly, his face full of exhaustion. Sirius hasn't gone out to relax in so long. If he keeps going like this, he's going to have serious health problems. Mrs. Weasley was clearly wavering, her voice even carried a hint of hesitation. Actually, it's not that it's impossible, it's just, there are only two of you. What? Is someone going out? A crisp voice came from the foyer, and a young red-haired witch skipped and hopped into the living room. I just heard something, like lime, cough cough cough, someone's going out. Oh, sorry. Red-haired witch coughed twice, then slipped and crashed heavily into the wall. A landscape painting that had just been hung on the wall was shaken by the tremor. I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. Tonks hurriedly straightened the painting, his face full of apology. Sigh, as you all know, I almost failed my stealth course back then, it has always been my weakness. As she spoke, she continued walking forward with large strides, unaware of her footing. Then she stepped on a trash can and fell to the ground, causing another chaotic scene. Harley couldn't help but shake her head. Ever since she met Miss Nymphadora Tonks, Sirius's niece, in the Order of the Phoenix, she had been impressed by Tonks. One reason is that Tonks is a rare, disguise magus, a natural master of human transfiguration. In terms of human transfiguration, Tonks is practically omnipotent. She can even transform most of her body into an animal form, thus becoming half an animagus. However, if you were to ask Harley what Tonks's most memorable trait was, it would definitely be Tonks's recklessness. In just 1 month, Harley had witnessed countless instances of the witch's recklessness. Knocking over a chair as you enter, missing a step on the stairs, and accidentally bumping into objects while walking are just basic occurrences for Tonks. The most ruthless time, she actually, successfully, found a rotten plank in Grimmauld Place and simply cut a hole in the floor. It can only be said that it was probably because of her extraordinary magical talent that even God couldn't stand it anymore and had to restrict and balance this witch from other directions. Besides that, Harley also vaguely discovered a little secret. This Miss Tonks liked Lupin, who was a whole 12 years older than her. Harley couldn't possibly have any objections. After all, Lupin had been single for so long, it was time for him to have a companion. Sirius, being rather careless, naturally didn't notice what had happened to his friend. The other Order of the Phoenix members weren't as perceptive or sensitive as Harley, so they were largely unnoticed. However, Lupin, as the person involved, noticed this. Having wandered for so long as a werewolf, he experienced the full spectrum of human emotions and was naturally very sensitive to the kindness and malice of others. Tonks kept pestering me to have a magic duel, or finding excuses to ask me for knowledge. During this process, Lupin also noticed the inappropriateness in her eyes and words. But even if she discovered it, what could she do? Lupin couldn't accept it, and was unwilling to accept Tonks's affections. Although I can now freely control the werewolf transformation and am no longer bothered by the full moon. However, Lupin always believed that he was just a werewolf and not qualified to have a normal relationship with an ordinary wizard. Therefore, he has been trying to avoid Tonks's advances lately, wanting to get away from her as quietly as possible. He had just made an excuse to get rid of Tonks so he could sneak out of Grimmauld Place. But now, he has finally been caught. 20 minutes later, Sirius, as the apparent leader, led the group to the safe house using a fixed portkey, then detoured via Leaky Cauldron, and finally arrived at Diagon Alley. Harley's appearance at Diagon Alley caused another commotion. Many wizards gathered around, wanting an autograph. Although Fudge relentlessly ordered his men to smear Harley, they could not provide any evidence and could only fabricate stories. Rita responded in kind by publishing an article in the Daily Prophet praising her owner. The youngest Order of Merlin, first-class winner, the youngest Magical School Potion Championship champion, the youngest Tri-Wizard Tournament champion, the youngest International Wizarding Duel Competition champion. Although many of the titles are old news and recycled material, the Wizarding World audience just loves it. Why would someone choose to support an old and overweight Fudge instead of a talented and good-looking young man like him? Isn't that ridiculous? Recently, public opinion surrounding the Ministry of Magic seems to have shifted, leaving Fudge with little time to address these issues. The most obvious manifestation of this is the significant decrease in the number of articles in various newspapers and magazines that mindlessly and angrily criticize Harley and Dumbledore. This has made the overall public opinion surrounding Wizarding World clearer, although many people disagree with and are unwilling to believe that Lord Voldemort is returning. However, this does not prevent everyone from supporting Harley Potter, the future of the British Wizarding World. Harley went to great lengths to successfully get rid of her crazed fans. Isn't it incredibly exciting? Sirius leaned closer and asked with great interest. You already have so many fans, Harley. You're a big celebrity in British Wizarding World now. I sense you're gloating, my dear godfather. Harley rolled his eyes, a hint of exasperation in his voice. Of course, I don't like this feeling of being a celebrity. Sirius snapped his fingers triumphantly. James and I disliked attracting attention the most back then. After all, how could we play pranks if we attracted too much attention? Oh, really? Harley suddenly grinned mischievously. It seems I should have a chat with Professor McGonagall after the semester starts. I'm sure she has many fond memories of your past together. At least Professor McGonagall can help me verify whether what you're saying is true. Sirius's expression instantly fell, clearly realizing that his words couldn't stand up to scrutiny. After a moment, Sirius grunted twice. As long as you don't ask Snivellus, I don't care about it. He's clearly Professor Snape, Harley corrected her godfather with a sigh. I'm getting more and more curious now. What exactly happened between you two? How did such a big conflict arise? As she spoke, Harley subconsciously touched her ear, but there were no glasses frames there. If the person in front of her wasn't her dearest godfather, she probably would have already used the control glasses to help her find out the truth of what happened back then. Immediately, Hermione and all the little wizards from the Weasley family who were still in school were also drawn to the topic, their eyes filled with curiosity. Although Tonks appeared unconcerned, his hair subtly changed color, as he wanted to find out more about Lupin's past deeds. However, Lupin and Sirius suddenly coughed violently and said in unison. Cough cough cough, we didn't do anything back then. Don't believe other people's slander. Especially Snivellus, everything he said was slander against us. ... P.S. In the 5th book, Tonks conjured a pig nose. Given her ability to transform her entire body, it's reasonable to infer that the disguise Magus is capable of transforming into various animals, making her a quasi-natural animagus. End of chapter. 375. Is he really a genius? When Sirius began to behave in various unusual ways, Harley became certain that something must have happened between them and Professor Snape back then. According to Harley's understanding, his father entered Hogwarts at the same time as Professor Snape, and they were apparently classmates. Sirius also disliked Professor Snape. When he first learned that Professor Snape often locked himself up, he was indignant and wished he could take wand and fight Professor Snape. When he learned that he was actually studying potion with Professor Snape under the guise of being confined there, he was shocked to discover that he was not actually there. Sirius began repeatedly reminding Harley to be careful, saying that Snape was a wicked old snake with a belly full of evil intentions and was no good person. Sirius's dislike for Snape is evident from this. Harley would never believe that nothing happened between the two of them during their school days. However, Harley also concluded that Sirius, Uncle Remus, and her own father were absolutely in the wrong. At least they believed that their behavior or something they did was unreasonable and should be morally condemned. Otherwise, Sirius would have already brought up Professor Snape's student days and attacked him in front of him. Given Sirius's similar mindset to that of the first graders' little wizards, Harley had no doubt that he was capable of such childish behavior. When even the usually mature and composed Uncle Remus suddenly exhibited such peculiar behavior, it becomes worth discussing what happened back then. However, since her godfather and uncle were unwilling to talk about it, Harley didn't ask any further questions. Tonks and the Weasley twins, standing nearby, were itching with impatience. What kind of nonsense is it to only say half of what you meant? Our curiosity was piqued, only to be forcibly put back in our heads. However, considering their own status, they couldn't ask directly, so they could only wink and give vague hints. Sirius, of course, pretended not to see it. Seriously, don't I have any pride? This greatly disappointed the onlookers. However, the three were soon drawn to something new that was amusing. When they went to Lady Malkin's robe shop to buy new robes, Ron and Ginny were the last to go in to have their height measured, while the other little wizards who had already been measured waited outside. Sirius was really bored, so after only 20 minutes of peace, he came back up and mysteriously boasted to Harley. Harley, do you know why the tone of the newspapers has changed so drastically lately, and why Professor Dumbledore is getting busier and busier? Harley glanced helplessly at the godfather, thinking that when he got back he would need to suggest to Professor Dumbledore that Sirius be given a job that required him to be away from home for an extended period. After all, Sirius and his animagus are so alike in personality that Scottish Deerhound really needs to go out more often. As for what Sirius wanted to say, she had naturally already guessed it. After Ludo returned to the British Ministry of Magic, he began collecting information according to his own requirements. Ludo also reported Fudge's recent political setbacks in detail. After Rita revealed the details of Lord Voldemort's resurrection in the Daily Prophet, along with accompanying illustrations, Fudge immediately fainted and was even taken to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries. After receiving treatment and finally returning to work, Fudge also fell into panic. It must be said that this Minister for Magic also has a great talent for comedy. To verify the truth of the matter, Fudge did not send Orr to investigate, but instead directly invited the person involved in the events mentioned in the newspaper, his own advisor Lucius Malfoy, to ask if you know who had been resurrected and summoned him. When Harley heard Ludo's report, she even suspected that Ludo was deceiving her and trying to give her false information. However, Rita also sent similar information, and Dobby confirmed the authenticity of this news based on Lucius Malfoy's whereabouts. Upon receiving confirmation, Harley froze on the spot. Is he really a genius? Checking with Lord Voldemort's men to see if Lord Voldemort has returned and whether he will endanger Wizarding World, that's really Fudge-worthy. Old Lucius, of course, obeyed his master's orders and concealed the resurrection of the Dark Lord with various lies. What? You say you have photos? Are you kidding? Photos can be faked. If you think these photos aren't fake, it just means your magic skills aren't high enough. As for his whereabouts that evening, old Lucius insisted that he had hosted a banquet at the manor. As a result, a traitor infiltrated the banquet, several pure bloods. Wizard, manipulated by the Crouch father and son, put potion in the wine at the manor, resulting in all the guests being kidnapped by the Crouch father and son. That's why they appeared as hostages in a place that was incongruous with their noble status. After receiving confirmation, Fudge's backache and leg pain instantly disappeared, and his energy returned completely. He first wrote to Barnabas Gove, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Prophet, again, demanding that Rita be blacklisted. However, Barnabas would naturally not agree to Fudge's unreasonable request. Just kidding, Rita's articles are so popular now that the sales of recent issues of the Daily Prophet have increased. Are you suggesting I shut down this golden goose, and then have the Ministry of Magic compensate us for our losses? So although this veteran reporter didn't directly confront the Ministry of Magic and Fudge, he kept changing the subject and tried every means to protect Rita. Seeing that he couldn't ban Rita, Fudge turned to sending his own writers to produce a large number of articles in the Daily Prophet refuting her. Just a few days after his article was published, another piece of bad news arrived. Fudge will become the first wizard to be impeached by Wizengamot. Professor Dumbledore still held some hope for Fudge, believing that after seeing the evidence in the newspaper, Fudge would admit his mistakes and actively prepare to deal with Lord Voldemort. However, with the evidence laid bare, Fudge remained obstinate and continued to contact Death Eater, which finally provoked Professor Dumbledore's anger. Professor Dumbledore began to use his rarely used power, as the chief of Wizengamot, to propose the impeachment of the current Minister for Magic. Although some Death Eaters also hold positions in Wizengamot and are trying to maintain the situation and buy time for Fudge. However, according to the rules of the British Ministry of Magic, a proposal to remove the chief of Wizengamot requires the approval of more than 2/3 of the members to pass, but a proposal to impeach the Minister for Magic only requires the approval of 1/2 of the members. So after a period of running around and communicating with other members of Wizengamot, Professor Dumbledore has reached a consensus with many wizards and obtained half of the votes. Just yesterday, Wizengamot finally passed the proposal and launched an impeachment proceedings against Fudge. Fudge is currently so busy trying to keep his position as Minister for Magic that he has no time to care about the opinions in the newspapers. Even though she already knew the whole story, Harley still decided to indulge her godfather's desire to show off, seeing his eager expression. "I don't know," Harley said softly. "My dear godfather, I hardly ever even attend the Order of the Phoenix meetings. So you think I know the relevant information? Hee hee." Sirius chuckled smugly. "Then let me give you a little lesson. Sirius, keep this a secret," Lupin said sternly in a low voice. "Don't forget we're still buying robes, and there are too many people around here." Relax, Professor Lupin." Fred, who was happily watching the drama unfold, quickly stopped Professor Lupin from spoiling the mood. "We're the only ones in the shop right now. Madame Malkin is still inside. Where would any other people come from? And we believe in Sirius," George chimed in. "Sirius is so mature and composed, he certainly wouldn't reveal secrets casually." Then the two of them immediately began to flatter Sirius in unison. Tonks also watched Lupin expectantly, helping the Weasley twins restrain Remus. Under the flattery, Sirius almost lost himself, proudly raising his head and beginning to recount everything he knew. "Honestly, I never expected Professor Dumbledore to get so angry." Sirius quickly finished recounting all the information he knew that didn't need to be kept secret, his expression still showing a hint of unfinished business. His expression was truly terrifying in the Order of the Phoenix conference room. Even Professor McGonagall and Snivellus were frightened. Professor McGonagall's eyes were full of worry, and Snivellus no longer dared to have that sour face. That's normal. After all, Professor Dumbledore has always been concerned about Wizarding World. Lupin shook his head, just in time to see the Weasley siblings and Mrs. Morkan walking out from behind. All right, Sirius, you can be quiet now. We need to continue purchasing the children's school supplies. Sirius couldn't help but roll his eyes, and as Lupin turned to pay, he stuck out his tongue, which made Fred and George burst into silent laughter. The rest of the trip was much faster. The group quickly visited all the shops and bought all sorts of items. Sirius will stay a few more minutes to have a butterbeer at Leaky Cauldron. However, Lupin, who had once been a professor, would not tolerate his outrageous behavior. After giving Sirius a punch, Sirius obediently followed his friend back to Grimmauld Place. For the next few days, Harley stayed obediently in Grimmauld Place. Even the wand stand and magic mirror stand, who were busy traveling around, have basically settled down and are waiting for the right opportunity. The main materials for the Sequence 1 ritual had already been prepared for him by others, and Harley had personally inspected and processed them on a small scale, so there was no need to worry too much. Only one day, close to the start of the school term, did Harley follow Werewolf to Knockturn Alley for a stroll. After the cannon fodder from the continent of O arrived on the mainland, Death Eater placed them near the coast of Great Britain, making it convenient to take them to Azkaban Island in the North Sea at any time. Meanwhile, the Death Eaters arranged for many Werewolf to purchase ingredients from the underground black market in Knockturn Alley. After all, no pure blood would be willing to support the filthy werewolf and the foolish giant, even if they were on the same side. Harley's wand clone, who had been monitoring them, also made a trip to Knockturn Alley. It turns out that she had wanted to go to Knockturn Alley many times, but was unable to do so due to various unforeseen circumstances. Now that Harley has been there, he has to admit that it really is a mixed bag. All kinds of dark arts items are openly sold at Knockturn Alley without any concealment. In the underground black market, all kinds of prohibited materials appear in large quantities. Many of them are counterfeit, but there are also genuine products. Besides Werewolf, Harley also discovered at least 5 Death Eaters in Knockturn Alley who were helping Lord Voldemort recruit, but these people were all peripheral figures among the Death Eaters. It seems I hurt Lord Voldemort too badly last time, and too many of my cannon fodder have been lost. So now, Lord Voldemort has started sending people to Knockturn Alley to look for wild dark wizards and recruit new cannon fodder. In addition to recruiting cannon fodder there, Lord Voldemort also ordered the Pure Blood family to offer high prices to purchase various strategic resources such as potion materials and magic items. Thanks to the Death Eaters in the Ministry of Magic, which has been in such a mess lately that they haven't had time to deal with what's happening in Knockturn Alley. Before they knew it, it was time for the start of the new school year. Hogwarts students boarded the train again, ready to head to school. However, Harley didn't stay in the private room for long, as she soon had to head to the perfect private room for a meeting. The perfect compartment is located in the third carriage of the train, and it is exceptionally luxurious. A former principal of Hogwarts once dedicated an entire train car to Perfect's use. Everyone here sits on a large sofa covered with colorful velvet cushions. Furthermore, the small coffee table next to the sofa was filled with fruits and snacks, which Perfect could enjoy for free. There was also a small bookshelf at the back of the private room, piled high with extracurricular reading materials for various subjects, to help Perfects pass the time when they were bored during their journey. As for the specific contents of the books, they are Transfigurations, Transfiguration Today, Transfigurations, Transfiguration Today, and Transfigurations. Transfiguration Today. The case is solved. Anyone with a brain can see that this was definitely done by Professor McGonagall. The Perfect's private rooms are already very luxurious, but it's said that this isn't even the limit. The first 2 carriages of the train are for the train staff, one of which is for professors who occasionally travel on the train. It is said that the professor's carriage has a special large bed and a dedicated house elf to serve him. They would even ship freshly made food from Hogwarts specifically for the professor. It was pure luxury. 376 Life is not a gamble, all in bets will ultimately lead to defeat. Harley arrived at the Perfect box quite late, and it was already quite a few students sitting inside. The Hogwarts actually have quite a few perfects, since each house selects 1 male perfect and 1 female perfect in the 5th year. These perfects will remain in their positions until graduation, and will not be dismissed unless they make a serious mistake. In other words, each college will have 6 perfects at the same time, 2 from each of the 5th, 6th, and 7th grades. The presidents of the male and female student councils are in charge of holding meetings for the prefects, so this private room can accommodate up to 26 people, and at least 24. After all, although most of the time, male and female student council presidents are chosen from among the perfect candidates, there are occasional exceptions. Praising Gryffindor during summer vacation when Sirius was talking about perfect, he mentioned that Lupin was the perfect in their year. However, in 7th grade, Professor Dumbledore chose Harley's father, James, as the student council president. When Harley appeared, the private room quickly fell silent, and the atmosphere became somewhat awkward. Almost all the prefects held their breath, their eyes filled with either awe or pride, though some looked on with hostility. Putting aside the huge incident that occurred at the end of last semester and during the summer vacation, Harley's winning the international wizarding duel competition is enough to make the other prefects have the utmost respect for him. Thanks to Rita's efforts in explaining things, everyone realized that the duel tournament was not as simple as the Triwizard tournament. This competition even includes dark wizards who have killed people, which shows how dangerous it is. Harley fought his way through this competition. Although it was not his choice, even Slytherin's Perfect had to admit that Harley was someone they had to look up to. Harley didn't think much of it. At Gryffindor he sat down on the sofa where Perfect was gathered, and quickly looked around. Most of the people here are acquaintances, such as Cedric, the 7th grade Perfect and student council president from Hufflepuff, and the 6th grade Perfect from Ravenclaw. Cho Chang, and Slytherin's 5th grade Perfect Malfoy and Pansy Parkinson's. As Harley was sizing up the other prefects continued to secretly watch her. Slytherin, sitting at the other end of the box. Draco Malfoy in Perfect has particularly complex feelings. Just today, before heading to platform 9 3/4, old Lucius had a long talk with young Draco. Draco, you know, the politics in the Ministry of Magic are incredibly turbulent right now, and Fudge's situation isn't good lately. In this semester, Fudge might make a last-ditch effort to find a way to circumvent some of the rules and forcefully send people to interfere in Hogwarts affairs, to cause trouble for Dumbledore and Harry Potter. When the time comes, you must not go with the person who is sent to Hogwarts, but you also must not oppose her. You just need to remain neutral on the surface and protect yourself, while secretly trying to be on good terms with Harley. Malfoy was puzzled by this, as it didn't seem like his father's way of doing things. Supporting the Ministry of Magic and profiting from it isn't the typical of my family. But old Lucius warned Draco, Draco, I hope you will remember what I said. Our House of Malfoy is not pure Britain. Wizard, our ancestor Armand Malfoy came to Britain with William the Conqueror. And after that, we continued to intermarry with the Muggles, and even tried to marry the Muggle Queen of Britain. However, after the Secrecy Act came into effect and the winds of Wizarding World shifted, we immediately distanced ourselves from Muggle and became a complete pure-blood family, staunch anti-Muggle advocates. Our House of Malfoy has existed for so long, while most other families of the same period have been lost to the annals of history. What do we rely on? Is it winning 1 or 2 gambles? Is it sticking to one ship forever and fighting to the death with the people on that ship? No, we rely on being good at identifying wind direction, knowing how to flexibly change our position, and occasionally learning to bet on both sides. Draco, remember this. We are pure-blood nobles, not gamblers. Never think about going all in. The Dark Lord is back now, but he was indeed defeated by Harley Potter himself, and twice at that. Harley Potter's methods are so dark, and his magic so cruel, that he doesn't seem like a completely good person like Dumbledore. So it is not entirely certain who the wizarding world will belong to in the future. In this situation, we must learn to be accommodating to both sides and not place all our hopes on the Dark Lord. Old Lucius's words dealt a severe blow to young Malfoy's fragile heart. He always considered himself a pure-blooded person. Wizard is proud and believes that the House of Malfoy is the purest of all existing families in the wizarding world. Now his own father is telling him that his ancestors followed the Muggle to Britain and even married the Muggle. And how come his own family is so good at, flexibly, changing its own position? This left little Malfoy in a daze, and he hasn't recovered yet. What made it even more painful for him was that, before entering the first year, Malfoy had considered Harley as the biggest rival he would face after entering Hogwarts. He wanted to befriend Harley beforehand and bring her to his side. After being humiliated by Harley, he wanted to trample Harley underfoot. Unfortunately, once they actually entered Hogwarts, the two didn't interact much at all. He wanted to provoke them, but they ignored him. Malfoy felt that in Harley's eyes, he was nothing more than a roadside weed, and nothing he did was worth attracting her attention. Nevertheless, Malfoy did not let go of his hostility towards Harley. Every time Harley was put in solitary confinement because of Professor Snape's targeting, he would cheer with joy. Now, it seems he has to mend his relationship with Harley again. This makes Malfoy particularly upset. Thinking about it carefully, it doesn't seem like my relationship with Potter has really deteriorated that much. Malfoy couldn't help but scratch his platinum blonde hair. It's hard to say whether she even noticed my hostility towards her. Come to think of it, why do I feel so miserable? What's wrong? Pansy noticed her boyfriend's unusual behavior, and worry immediately appeared on her face, which resembled a poodle. The Parkinson family is also a pure-blood family, and the current patriarch, Mr. Parkinson, holds a significant position within Death Eater. Therefore, Pansy naturally knew of the Dark Lord's return, and even more clearly knew that the Dark Lord was currently residing in Malfoy's house. It's nothing. Malfoy glanced at his girlfriend beside him and sighed silently. Soon, all the perfects arrived. The fact that another perfect in Gryffindor is Neville surprised everyone. After all, apart from her herbology class grades, Neville's other grades don't seem to be outstanding, and her potions are notoriously bad. Moreover, he usually seems particularly easy to bully and is often targeted by Slytherin students. He doesn't seem like a qualified Gryffindor at all, let alone a perfect of Gryffindor Academy. However, since Professor McGonagall chose Neville as the perfect, and Professor Dumbledore approved it, the other prefects of Gryffindor naturally accepted Neville quickly. When Slytherin's 7th grade male prefect, Bit McNeil, provoked Neville, the prefects of Gryffindor immediately rallied to his defense. Angelina went even further, spewing out traditional Chinese slang, leaving McNeil speechless. This deeply moved Neville, and his eyes even began to well up with tears. Once everyone had arrived, the Student Council president quickly began the meeting. This year's Student Council presidents are Cedric from Hufflepuff and Pamela Gonzalez from Ravenclaw. The meeting proceeded quickly, ending after the prefects. Patrol areas were rapidly defined and the rules they should follow were established. It's all because of Percy 2 years ago. After the meeting, Angelina whispered to Harley, explaining the situation. Percy is determined to get into the Ministry of Magic, so he always speaks in a bureaucratic tone when the Perfect holds meetings. This also led to the fact that after he finally became the Student Council president, the meeting he held on the train lasted until after 2 p.m., and he even required us to patrol until the train entered the station. And in the following semesters, he tried his best to imitate the high-ranking officials of the Ministry of Magic when he spoke to us. This disgusted everyone, and as a result, the meetings in the past 2 years have become increasingly concise and clear since he left. Harley recalled the tone of Percy's voice when he occasionally came to Grimmauld Place during the summer and nodded with a slight sense of lingering fear. It is said that there is no true empathy in the world, but when faced with people who speak in official jargon, everyone can still feel the same pain. The Perfects' daily patrol missions are tedious and boring, with almost no difficulty. All they need to do is wander around on the train for at least half an hour, and then they can finish their mission and do whatever they want with the rest of the time. During patrols, the prefects only need to restrain students from various violations and prevent fights between them. If needed, Perfect also has the right to deduct points from students, but they must write a report to the school afterwards, explaining their reasons and proving that they did not deduct points arbitrarily. Harley and Neville were assigned to the same group and quickly moved along the carriage. Along the way, classmates often jumped out to greet Harley, and some little witches even mustered up the courage to ask for autographs. When she received the autograph, the little girl jumped around excitedly, holding the autograph in her hands as if she had received some precious treasure. Even Harley felt a little embarrassed, while Neville watched the scene with envy. "What, you want an autograph too?" Harley joked, noticing Neville's expression. Neville shook his head frantically, stammering, No, I don't need it, no. I mean," seeing Neville's expression, Harley burst out laughing. "What, Neville, am I that scary? We've been in school together for 4 years, and I've never seen you this afraid of me." "I'm sorry." Neville suddenly deflated like a punctured balloon, his head hanging low in dejection. I just admire your superb magic skills, your excellent grades, and how popular you are with everyone. Unlike me, I'm useless. Nobody believes I'm perfect. They think Professor McGonagall made a mistake. Those Slytherin perfects were right to mock me. I was indeed too cowardly. I shouldn't be Gryffindor, let alone become Gryffindor's perfect." Quote. Harley raised an eyebrow at Neville's performance. In Neville, each year's perfect is personally selected by the dean of the college, and then approved by Professor Dumbledore before it can be approved. Do you think Professor McGonagall made the wrong choice? Or did Professor Dumbledore misjudge the situation? Neville's mind went blank for a moment before he whispered. "It's not impossible, after all, I'm not brave at all." Harley almost laughed out of exasperation, but she still patiently encouraged Neville. Neville, you have to believe that the fact that Sorting Hat put you in Gryffindor means you're a good fit for the college. And Professor Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall have never misjudged, especially this class of students. So you should have more confidence in yourself and believe that you still have untapped potential. Harley managed to convince Neville after some persuasion. However, this also made Harley sweat, as encouraging little wizards was no easy task. Besides signing autographs for other little wizards and encouraging his fellow Neville, Harley also witnessed the diversity of talent in the Hogwarts during his patrols. It has to be said that everyone usually acts quite respectable at school, but once they get into semi-private spaces like private rooms, many little wizards reveal their true nature. Harley saw the two boys walking together and hugging on more than one occasion, looking very intimate. Among them were even Hufflepuff classmates in the same grade, like Justin. It's absolutely outrageous. Even though this is the Great Ying Empire, you should at least be mindful of your influence, okay? In addition, Fred and George also caused a lot of trouble for the prefects. After receiving a large amount of startup capital and conducting research for a long time, the two have already stabilized the magic effects of several products and can sell them in large quantities. As a result, there were often roaring wolf-tooth flying saucers in the corridor, screaming seeds suddenly exploding and emitting ear-piercing screams, and even the smell of enhanced dung eggs emanating from the private rooms. This left Harley physically and mentally exhausted. As soon as the minimum time was up, he ended his patrol, said goodbye to Neville, and slipped back to his private room. Patrolling was so exhausting, she needed Hermione's lap pillow to soothe her weary soul. 377 Come, let me see. Inside the private room, Hermione was scribbling on paper while flipping through her textbook, reviewing the semester's lessons. Last semester, thanks to the Triwizard Tournament, Hermione was able to study alongside Harley and Fleur. Therefore, she has also gained a lot. Her magical skills in the practical field have increased significantly, and she has made far more progress in several theoretical courses with practical benefits than her classmates. However, with 5th grade starting soon, Hermione feels it's necessary to review her 5th grade material to make sure she doesn't forget anything. This made Hannah and Susan feel extremely awkward when they came over to visit. They only sat down and chatted for a couple of minutes before quickly leaving. "You're back?" Hermione asked casually without looking up when she noticed Harley's return. "So, is the perfect box really as luxurious as Fred and George said?" "It's quite luxurious, really." Harley nodded, and naturally lay down on the bench. Think about it, 24 to 26 people occupying an entire train carriage, how can that not be extravagant? And it's only used twice a semester, what a waste. As she spoke, Harley shifted her body, finding a more comfortable position. "Let me rest for a while, patrolling is exhausting." "Don't give me that," Hermione said casually, brushing Harley's hair aside. "Don't just press down on one leg, it'll easily make my leg go numb. Also, don't disturb my studying. What if I insist on interfering?" 1 second Harley was lying on the bench, the next she was sitting next to Hermione, her chin resting lightly on Hermione's shoulder, staring at the table with a seemingly serious expression. "Didn't you already learn this knowledge at the beginning of last semester? Why do you need to review it again now? Having learned it doesn't stop me from reviewing it more often." Hermione was forced to close her laptop due to Harley's interference, and gave Harley's restless hand a pinch in annoyance. "I make time to review the key points I've learned each semester, and I think it's a good habit." "You're really hardworking." Harley deliberately drew out her words, using one hand to grab Hermione's hands behind her back, crushing her attempt to resist. "Come, let me see." Before he could finish speaking, there was a sudden knock on the door. "Please come in." Harley raised his voice, and at the same time, he appeared opposite Hermione, sitting upright with a book open on his lap. Hermione glared fiercely at Harley, while quickly tidying her hair and clothes to make them look less disheveled. That wretched Harley, those hands of hers have no sense of propriety at all. The door to the private room was opened, and a 3rd grade girl walked in. "Excuse me, I have 2 invitations to deliver to Harley Potter and Hermione Granger." As she spoke, the little girl handed over 2 rolls of parchment tied with purple silk ribbons. When her gaze met Harley's, her face suddenly flushed red for some reason, and she stammered in a slightly excited voice. "Excuse me, Potter-senpai, could you sign your name on my sleeve? I brought a magic pen that won't fade." "Of course." Harley smiled slightly, took the pen, and quickly wrote his signature on Little Witch's sleeve. Little Witch was overjoyed, thanked him profusely, and then stumbled out of the private room. "Our new prefect in Gryffindor is really popular," Hermione remarked, having witnessed everything. Cough cough cough. Harley coughed a few times, without replying, and casually opened the invitation with her name on it. Let me see whose invitation this is. The parchment itself is extremely soft and delicate, and is edged with gold. The font above is fancy. Dear Miss Harley Potter, long time no see. I would be very happy if you could have lunch with me in VIP room C. Your faithful, Horace Slughorn, Professor. Slughorn Professor. Hermione looked at the invitation in her hand, her fingers lightly tracing the gilded signature. This name sounds familiar, let me think. Seeing that Hermione was deep in thought, Harley didn't rush to remind her. I remember now. Hermione clapped her hands suddenly. Your paper on potions, a new approach to improving invisibility potion, seems to have included Slughorn among your advisors. Professor. Harley was momentarily speechless, the words she wanted to say stuck in her throat. You're right, it's him. After a half-minute silence, Harley nodded. He was also one of the professors who took me to the magical school potion championship. Later, when we were in France for summer vacation, we stayed at his villa. Oh right. Hermione then remembered the other unimportant details. I forgot all that. I was just thinking about whether he had published any papers recently. Harley didn't reply, but instead took down the robe hanging behind the door. She didn't comment on Hermione's way of thinking, after all, that was very Hermione. The train corridor was very crowded at this time. It was approaching noon, and many little wizards had crawled out of their compartments to wait for the fat witch who was delivering food. However, Harley and Hermione's journey was relatively unimpeded, with many little wizards instinctively making way for Harley when they saw her. Of course, the corridor became even noisier. The two quickly arrived at carriage C. This carriage is exceptionally large, resembling a large hall, clearly indicating that someone has used the undetectable extension charm. By this time, quite a few people were already seated inside, including Cormac Mulligan from Gryffindor, Blaise Zabini from Slytherin, Marcos Belby from Ravenclaw, and other classmates whom Harley knew but hadn't spoken to much. Harley spotted Ginny and Neville further inside the box, both looking bewildered, seemingly unaware of why they were there. Harley, my dear child. Slughorn the professor jumped up as soon as he saw Harley. He had gotten even fatter, his round belly filling out his velvet clothes completely. His bald head gleamed under the carriage lights, more dazzling than his silver beard and the gold buttons on his vest. It's been a long time, my dear child. Slughorn the professor warmly welcomed Harley. So, this must be Miss Granger. Good afternoon, Slughorn, Professor. Harley gave a slight bow, then introduced Hermione. That's right, Professor, she is Hermione Granger. Oh, that's wonderful. I've been wanting to meet Miss Granger for ages. Slughorn the professor nodded. Every time we discuss potions, I can read Miss Granger's unique insights in your writing. Her new ideas on processing the blood of the Kwesong tree frog were really ingenious. I studied them for a long time and even planned to mentor Miss Granger on a paper this semester. I must say, Miss Granger's potency is among the top 10 of all the students I've ever seen. Of course, Harley, you are undoubtedly number one, you are even better than your mother. Thank you for the compliment, Slughorn, Professor. Hermione politely thanked the professor. I am also very much looking forward to your class. Harley, however, was somewhat interested and wanted to know who the other people with extremely high potency were. Unfortunately, Slughorn the professor deliberately avoided the topic. Clearly, there were a few people among them whom he didn't want to mention. The two were seated in the nearest seats arranged by the professor, while Slughorn. The professor then sat down next to Harley. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, Malfoy happened to be sitting on the other side of him. However, Malfoy has been keeping his head down ever since Harley entered the box, and he hasn't shown any particular reaction yet. Slughorn's attitude towards him was also somewhat strange. He seemed to have extended an invitation but wasn't particularly enthusiastic. After everyone had arrived, Slughorn the professor quickly introduced everyone to each other, helping them get to know each other better. After all, he had taught at Hogwarts for so many years and knew that even if two people entered the school at the same time, they might not have spoken a single word to each other for 7 years. While introducing Slughorn, the professor would also intentionally or unintentionally point out their background or special characteristics, and occasionally chat about them. Obviously, Slughorn the professor didn't change his hobby, he was constantly trying to expand his network of connections. Apart from Hermione and Ginny, the other people who came to this private room all had some significant backgrounds. Hermione was invited because of her exceptional magic skills, which Harley frequently mentioned in his letters. Ginny, on the other hand, attracted Slughorn by casting a beautiful bat-like spell in the hallway. I was invited because the professor noticed me. And Slughorn the professor is also very realistic. Upon learning that Marcos Belby was not acquainted with his uncle, Damocles Belby, who had developed the Wolfsbane potion, and that their relationship was not friendly, he immediately became cold towards him. Throughout the lunch, Slughorn the professor mentioned Harley almost every 3 sentences. He even joked about his bald head, telling Harley that she had become a qualified potions master and could improve Potter family shampoo so that it could help older people like him with hair loss. Harley could only apologize, since the Potter family's shampoo business had already been sold. Finally, Slughorn the professor also led everyone in reminiscing about the past, telling anecdotes about the outstanding wizards he had taught, and incidentally promoting an organization he founded called the Slug Club. Slughorn continued until the train passed through a long stretch of dense fog and entered the crimson glow of the sunset. The professor had just finished reminiscing. Oh my god. Slughorn the professor looked around and blinked in the twilight. It's almost dark. Have we been talking this late already? Alas, memories of the past are always so appealing to an old person. Every time they are brought up, one can't help but get lost in them. Children, you'd better hurry back and change into your school uniforms to prepare for the opening banquet. You are welcome to come anytime. I'd be happy to chat with you. This professor is really flamboyant, in some ways even comparable to Lockhart. On her way back to her private room, Hermione couldn't help but complain. Luxurious invitations, with house elf delivering meals to him on the train, and the guests were all classmates with connections. Thinking about it this way, he was even more of a show-off than Lockhart. At least Lockhart didn't hold such events on the train. It can't be that bad, it can't be that bad, Harley said to Slughorn. The professor defended himself. Professor just enjoys life and likes to associate with powerful wizards. He is usually quite kind and is happy to help talented little wizards who lack a platform, or to help them connect with masters in the same field so that they can reach a higher level. In Slughorn, the professor himself is highly accomplished in potions, unlike Lockhart, who is incompetent. Comparing him to Lockhart really lowers the level of professor. After tidying up the scattered books in their private room, Hermione, holding a potion class notebook, suddenly asked thoughtfully. By the way, Slughorn, the professor is a potions master whose skill level is not much lower than Professor Snape's. So what subject will he teach at Hogwarts? Will he share the potion class with Professor Snape? He should be the Potten class, after all, he used to be Slytherin's dean and part-time Potten class. Professor. Harley changed into her school uniform robe. If I'm not mistaken, Professor Snape will probably be taking on the role of professor in Defense Against the Dark Arts. He had longed for this position for a long time, and this year he finally got his wish. Really? I thought Sirius was coming to give us a lesson. Hermione was clearly disappointed. Sirius has been sent out, Harley explained. His animagus is a Scottish deerhound, perfect for traversing through the woods. So Professor Dumbledore asked him to become a scout, responsible for monitoring Malfoy Manor, and to try his luck and see if he could run into Lord Voldemort. Seeing Hermione's worried expression, Harley added, Professor Dumbledore is still very careful. Does anyone in Death Eater know Sirius? Regarding the question of Animagus's specific form, the professor has already taken precautions. Sirius will go to Muggle's veterinary hospital beforehand to disguise himself in Muggle's Manor. Animagus itself does not possess particularly strong magical fluctuations. With these two methods combined, it is very difficult for the wizard to detect it. Lord Voldemort and the Death Eaters look down on the Muggle, so naturally they wouldn't understand this technology from the Muggle. Hermione nodded, and the worry on her face lessened considerably. 378 I chickened out, but I'm proud of it. The train finally slowed down and stopped near the Hogsmeade station. However, the weather around the station was not good, the sky was dark and overcast, and it was pouring rain. As soon as the train doors opened, the sound of howling wind and rumbling thunder immediately filled the air. A bolt of lightning struck from midair, hitting Black Lake and charring a small squid that had just surfaced. Why is it this awful weather again? Hermione muttered to herself. It was just like this a few years ago, it was really unbearable. Prefect also needs to maintain order and prevent younger students from crowding together to avoid stampedes. But this terrible weather, Harley, you're really in for a rough day. That's not necessarily true. Harley chuckled softly, looked up at the sky, and her eyes gleamed with a green hue. The thunder stopped abruptly, the lightning that had streaked across the sky ceased to flash, the torrential rain disappeared back into the clouds, and the fierce wind gradually dissipated. Seeing Hermione's surprised look, Harley gently raised one finger. Don't be surprised, it's just a little help from weather charm. Soon, with the help of the prefects, the students were completely off the train. A strange yet crisp female voice rang out. First-year students, please line up here. All first-year students, please follow me. A lantern emerged shakily from the darkness not far away. The lantern bearer was an elderly witch. Her gray hair was cut very short, her chin was prominent, and she looked meticulous. Who is this? Where is Hagrid? I remember it was Glampra Professor, Harley whispered to Hermione, explaining. I've seen photos of her with Newt. She's always been a master of magical creatures and is happy to substitute for the professors who protect magical creatures in unexpected situations at Hogwarts. So, Hagrid encountered an unexpected situation. Hermione immediately grasped the crux of the problem, her face showing concern. It shouldn't be considered an unexpected situation. Harley's expression was somewhat strange as she recalled a scene transmitted from one of her clones. The image shows Hagrid and Madame Maxime wearing thick winter coats, running wildly through the snow in the Alps. The two were holding hands, looking very harmonious and beautiful, giving people the feeling that Hagrid seems to have another chance after her initial setback. Well, if you ignore Giant and Death Eater chasing closely behind, and also ignore the panicked expressions on their faces, the scene would be even more perfect. Although Hagrid is very brave, no one could remain so calm when being chased by Giant and Death Eater. Hagrid was probably sent to the Alps by Professor Dumbledore. After the little wizards were all seated in the carriage, Harley quietly explained to Hermione. Professor Dumbledore has been trying to contact Giant to prevent him from joining Lord Voldemort's camp. Given Hagrid's background and lineage, although Professor Dumbledore didn't say, Hagrid is definitely the best candidate. As for the rest, I think you can guess it yourself. After a moment's thought, Hermione nodded in sudden understanding and didn't ask any more questions about the core secrets of the Order of the Phoenix. The two followed the path all the way to the dark, rain-washed street outside Hogsmeade Station. There were still many horse-drawn carriages parked on the street, and students boarded them one by one. However, the carriage that Harley often rode in, which was parked at the very back of all the carriages, was ignored. Occasionally, little wizards would try to ride in the carriage, but as soon as they stuck their heads in, they would immediately back out in fright. Harley and Hermione walked straight over, and Harley knocked on the door before opening it. Before she could say anything, she was instantly enveloped by an aura of luxury. The dilapidated wooden chairs that used to be on the carriage have disappeared, replaced by a fine brown leather sofa. Between the two sofas was a coffee table with candied pineapple and delicate glasses filled with low-concentration mead. Slughorn the professor sat there, casually fiddling with the pineapple preserves with his fingers, occasionally popping one into his mouth, looking quite content. When he noticed the carriage door open, he instinctively looked over and raised his hand. If the student who appeared outside the door was an unknown individual, he would probably politely ask them to leave. However, upon discovering that it was Harley outside, Slughorn the professor jumped up from the sofa instantly, his face full of excitement. Harley. Slughorn the professor's voice seemed to tremble slightly. Ah, what a coincidence. I haven't ridden in a carriage in a long time since I graduated from Hogwarts. I took the ride today to relive those memories, and I never expected to run into you. Harley's expression remained unchanged, and she did not expose Slughorn. Professor, is this carriage still available? Of course. Slughorn the professor's voice was very loud. No need to be so respectful to Professor, my dear child. We've been writing letters to each other for so long, you can totally consider me a friend. After Harley and Hermione boarded the carriage, the Thestrals began to move slowly. Clearly, based on their weight, they determined that there were already 4 people on the carriage, meeting the criteria for starting the journey. On the carriage, Slughorn the professor was still enjoying his pineapple preserves and mead, while 2 cups of black tea appeared in front of Harley and Hermione. While eating, he chatted with Harley about the current state of Wizarding World, clearly with a hidden meaning. Finally, Slughorn the professor couldn't resist any longer and steered the conversation to what he was most interested in. Harley, Rita said in the Daily Prophet that you encountered you-know-who on your last project at Triwizard Tournament and crushed him head-on. Is this real news? Has something really happened that shocked us? Harley didn't answer directly, but just smiled, didn't even take out his wand, and lightly snapped his fingers. A window instantly appeared on the carriage, which was imbued with magic and difficult to deform, allowing a clear view of the night outside. The dark clouds in the sky had dispersed, leaving only a clear blue sky where the moon could be seen directly. However, extremely bad weather appeared on the road where Hogwarts Express had come from. A sudden clap of thunder echoed across the sky, and large swaths of dark clouds gathered in an instant. The downpour arrived in an instant, and the surroundings were covered in a white curtain of rain, but the heavy rain perfectly avoided the location of the carriage. Moreover, white snowflakes were clearly mixed in with the rain, both falling from the same dark cloud, yet distinct and undisturbed by each other. A bolt of lightning ripped across the sky and struck a large tree by the roadside, but it did not set it ablaze. A layer of solid ice had appeared on the tree trunk at some unknown time, keeping the lightning out. Slughorn intrigued, the professor pushed open the glass, reached out, and caught 2 snowflakes. A fantastic weather charm. So it turns out you were the one who released the previous weather charm. I thought Albus was the one who did it. After carefully observing the 2 snowflakes, Slughorn the professor nodded and sighed. Now I believe you have the ability to stand up to you-know-who. Laymen watch the spectacle, experts watch the details. An average wizard might not be impressed by this scene, and might not even be able to tell what Harley did or what magic she used. But Slughorn the professor clearly sensed Harley's undisguised spellcasting aura. He asked himself honestly, even if he practiced weather charm for another 20 years, he would never be able to do it as effortlessly as Harley. Moreover, Harley not only demonstrated weather charm, but also showcased her superb silent casting, skillful wandless casting, and precise control over spells. When using weather charm, it can perfectly limit its coverage area and use the coverage area to a very extreme degree. Compared to when we avoided the carriage during the heavy rain and snow, we stayed close to the edge of the carriage, almost tracing its outline. Slughorn the moment the professor's fingertips extended a little beyond the carriage, they touched the rain and snow. Slughorn professor has also seen other internationally renowned top weather charm masters use the same magic. However, they could not perform such precise operations, nor could they achieve the level of doing things at will, and were far inferior to Harley. I believe Rita and Albus now. Slughorn the professor smiled with relief. I feel relieved now. Professor, what happened? Harley waved her hand, dispelling the weather charm outside, and looked at Slughorn across the way with an inquisitive gaze. Professor. Well, it's not that I can't talk about it, but it's a long story. Slughorn the professor hesitated for a moment, but ultimately chose to tell the truth. As a party involved in the Triwizard tournament, you should know that Durmstrang, principal of the magic school Karkaroff, ran away midway through the match. Of course, he has recently reappeared, but something has happened to him. Did something happen to him? Harley's eyes held a hint of curiosity. After all, she hadn't really paid much attention to Karkaroff, an insect that posed no threat to her. You know, Karkaroff was my student back then. Slughorn the professor sighed and shook his head. I always felt that he was destined for great things. After all, Karkaroff showed his ruthlessness even when he was still a student. Cough cough cough. After a series of masked coughs, Slughorn the professor changed the subject. In short, Karkaroff is dead. Dead. Hermione, standing to the side, opened her mouth slightly, looking somewhat surprised. Although Hermione disliked Karkaroff, this shameless and unscrupulous guy, she had to admit that Karkaroff was quite capable in combat. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to become the principal of Durmstrang, a magic school that values dark arts, reveres violence, and is known for its frequent brawls. It should be noted that, according to Hermione's reading of Durmstrang according to the school history of Magic School, more than 5 principals of Durmstrang were assassinated by students. They didn't even feel ashamed of it, and openly recorded it in the school's history, forever etching those few good-for-nothings who were assassinated onto the pillar of shame in Durmstrang's school history. To be able to serve as principal at such a school for so long, and to be so demanding and disliked by students, Karkaroff must be quite capable. But now, Wizard, who was alive and kicking just a few months ago, has died so quietly. That's right. Slughorn the professor nodded. Karkaroff is dead. He died without a sound. He died in the small village of Muggle in Great Britain, and his body was discovered by Muggle. Next to his body, there was the dark mark that had been deliberately gouged out from his left arm. Because there were no floating dark marks at the scene, the Ministry of Magic believes that this was probably just the work of someone who hates the Death Eater. He probably had his family taken away by the Death Eater, but all the confirmed Death Eaters are in Azkaban, which is why he targeted Karkaroff, a Death Eater whose identity had been exposed, for murder. But Professor Dumbledore showed me other evidence that this was a Death Eater's roundup of traitors. He also proved to me that you know who is back. At this point, Slughorn the professor trembled slightly, a flicker of fear crossing his eyes. So, Professor, because of this, you chose to seek refuge in Hogwarts. Harley joked. She had assumed that Slughorn, a top potions master known for his stubbornness, was the one standing before her. The professor would deny it, but to everyone's surprise, he readily nodded in agreement. Yes, that's why I came to Hogwarts. Slughorn the professor nodded. To be honest, I'm not afraid of you laughing at me. I taught you-know-who when he was young, so I know his past identity. And you know who has been obscuring his past all these years. Someone like me who knows him inside and out is someone who is doomed in his eyes. I was prepared to begin my life on the run in Britain, changing places to live every week to avoid being killed by you-know-who. However, Albus convinced me, after all, he was in charge of Hogwarts, and there was also you, the genius who personally defeated you-know-who. It's obvious that Hogwarts is safer. As he spoke, Slughorn the professor even tilted his head back. I chickened out, but I'm proud of it. P.S. Durmstrang is a secondary setting, but it's not surprising that a school that loves dark arts so much would frequently have violent incidents. Damn it, I can never seem to summarize the key points in the essay section. It's so frustrating. 379 The Humble Pink Toad. Slughorn Harley had anticipated that the professor would back down. After all, this professor from Slytherin has always been fond of enjoyment, craving privileges, and also afraid of death. However, he didn't like to attract attention in the open, but instead invested in a large number of students he believed had potential. Slughorn the professor provided these students with the knowledge they craved or a shortcut to their ultimate goal, and formed a club around himself to connect them. After these individuals, whom he considered geniuses, successfully ascended to high positions in the wizarding world, they would then turn around and criticize Slughorn. Professors receive various benefits and rewards. This allows him to enjoy hidden privileges from all walks of life without taking any risks. As for those students he didn't have high hopes for, Slughorn, aside from fulfilling their duty as professors to impart knowledge, professors do no extra work whatsoever. Therefore, he is a quintessential Slytherin, a quintessential, refined egoist. Given his personality, he certainly wouldn't have the courage to face Lord Voldemort, a dark wizard who is mentally unstable, doesn't follow the rules, and is incredibly powerful. However, Slughorn Harley was genuinely surprised that the professor was so straightforward in telling her and Hermione that he had chickened out. What's wrong? Slughorn was taken aback by the strange looks from Harley and Hermione. The professor's face turned slightly red. There's nothing to hide. I'm just afraid of you-know-who. After all, I'm a potions master, not an expert in duels or defense against the dark arts, so I can't beat him. Seeing that his image seemed to be getting worse the more he tried to explain, Slughorn. The professor decisively chose to change the subject. Harley, about that slug club I mentioned on the train, would you like to join? I can introduce you to many magic masters in various fields, which will definitely help you climb to the top of magic. Hermione, the same goes for you, my invitation to you has always been there. He looked at Harley and Hermione with expectant eyes, mainly focusing on Harley. After all, Slughorn the professor is keen on collecting such promising students and cannot allow himself to miss out on such a gem. Hermione didn't make a choice immediately, but instead turned to look at Harley. Harley thought for a moment and nodded. Of course, Professor, I would be happy to join your club. However, I probably won't participate in most of the club's activities. Slughorn the professor looked somewhat disappointed. May I ask why this is? In fact, I don't plan to participate in any of the other professors' clubs this semester either. Harley looked somewhat troubled. As you know, the knowledge taught in these clubs is no longer up to the pace of my self-study, so it's a waste of my time to participate in their activities. Moreover, I want to climb to even greater heights with magic, so time is naturally very precious to me. Of course, you make a lot of sense. Hearing that Harley didn't have a problem with him, Professor Slughov's expression immediately underwent a vivid change. I can totally understand. After all, the real geniuses are those little wizards who are both talented and willing to put in the effort. I believe that you have achieved this level at your age, and besides your exceptional talent, you must have also put in a lot of hard work. Throughout the rest of the trip, Professor Slughorn kept initiating conversations about potions. Hermione was particularly interested in this, and she was able to answer most of the difficult questions posed by the professor fluently. When she occasionally encounters knowledge she doesn't understand, Hermione will write it down in her notebook, preparing to study it in detail at the library after the start of the semester. This allowed Slughorn the professor was increasingly delighted, and his gaze toward Hermione was filled with admiration. The carriage continued forward, and Hogwarts Castle drew ever closer, its towering spires appearing and disappearing in the dark night sky and misty fog. The carriage jingled and came to a stop beside the stone steps leading to the oak gate. Slughorn the professor casually opened the car door. I'm sorry, my dear children, I must go ahead and go find Professor Dumbledore. With that, he quickly stepped off the carriage and disappeared into the crowd. Harley and Hermione got out of the car one after the other, and a magical fluctuation came from behind them. After realizing that no one was in the car, Slughorn the professor's magic was then deactivated, restoring the carriage to its original state. Breathing in the cold air around her, Harley glanced at the forbidden forest in the distance. The forbidden forest was pitch black, with no strange sounds, and the wooden cabin next to it showed no signs of life. It seemed Hagrid had not yet returned. That makes sense, given that the mixed-race giant is extremely large and has very high magic resistance. This makes it extremely difficult for them to use apparition, let alone have someone else bring them to reveal their followers. Hagrid itself doesn't use apparition, and while Madame Maxime does, her use of this magic is generally limited. In addition, Hagrid suddenly turned into a brother-supporting demon, bringing along a super-sized burden, and unlike other giants, he didn't have the magic of a Death Eater to cover it up. So it's normal that he can't come back now. It would be really strange if he could. The students hurried up the stone steps and entered the castle. The lobby was bathed in the red glow of torches, and the chaotic footsteps of students echoed all around. After passing through 2 large doors, the students returned to the Great Hall, which they had been away from for a long time. The black curtains that had been added above the Great Hall at the end of the previous semester have disappeared, and the flags representing the 4 colleges have returned. The Great Hall was filled with 4 long college dining tables, and the ceiling above reflected the weather outside. However, it's clear that it wasn't fully aligned with the outside world. The ceiling probably couldn't react to Harley's series of weather charms. It's perfectly clear outside, and you can see the moon, but the ceiling is covered with dark clouds, and it's pouring rain. The candles floating above the dining table used their magic flames to dispel the darkness brought by the bad weather on the ceiling and illuminate the faces of the little wizards. By this time, most of the students had already sat down and were chatting excitedly, exchanging news from their summer vacation. When they looked up and saw Harley and Hermione entering last, their conversation stopped for a moment, then resumed in a low, excited discussion. Even though they had seen Harley so many times, many classmates still stared at her with excitement. Harley strode through the crowd and sat down at Gryffindor's table, skillfully responding to the congratulations from her classmates while glancing at the teachers' section. The long faculty table was already full of professors. Professor Dumbledore, who often disappeared during the summer vacation, has returned, wearing a dark purple robe covered with silver stars that has never been seen before, and a matching pointed soft hat on his head. Professor Dumbledore was leaning back in his gold high-backed chair, looking radiant and in excellent spirits. However, the presence of an ugly-looking person next to him disrupted the sense of incongruity in the scene. A short, chubby witch with short, gray-brown hair, a big pink bow on her head, and a fluffy cardigan was sitting there. Those pale, toad-like eyes, with their drooping eyelids and bulging pupils, looked even more exaggerated than before, and were increasingly repulsive. At this moment, Witch was obsequiously lowering his already short stature and chatting respectfully with Professor Dumbledore. Professor Dumbledore appeared to be in a good mood, with a smile on his face and his head tilted towards the witch. The witch kept smiling and nodding, her humility even greater than when she faced Fudge. Umbridge. Harley narrowed his eyes, recalling the name of the pink toad on the teacher's table. Who? Our new teacher. Hermione, who was also looking around the teacher's section, subconsciously chimed in. But that doesn't make sense. The Defense Against the Dark Arts course professor should logically be Professor Snape, while the potion class professor is Slughorn Professor. Someone has temporarily taken over Hagrid's courses. Are there any other courses where we need instructors? She probably isn't a professor. Harley shook her head, recalling some information that Ludo and Rita had reported to her. Opening parenthesis. End of this chapter. 380. The witch's eyes are indeed very accurate. According to Ludo's latest report yesterday, Fudge is on the verge of being removed from office, and many of his decrees will be rejected. Even now, those pure-blood family members who secretly follow Lord Voldemort are still supporting Fudge and trying to help him stabilize the status quo. However, the collapse of the edifice is unstoppable. Fudge will be completely kicked out of the Ministry of Magic in 6 months at most, and may even disappear physically. After all, his recent madness had offended many neutral pure-blood members, and these people were no pushovers either. Unless Fudge is willing to voluntarily relinquish his power now, he might be able to obtain a powerless advisory position in the Ministry of Magic, save his life, and live out his old age in peace. However, Fudge was certainly unwilling to accept this miserable reality. He was power-hungry, which is why he opposed Dumbledore. Asking him to give up his rights now, it would be better to kill him. The appearance of the pink toad in Hogwarts is Fudge's last struggle within his limited power. Based on the information provided by Ludo, Rita, and Dobby, Fudge likely maintains his original objective and wants to directly target Dumbledore's reputation. Since fabricating negative stories in the newspapers won't work, let's artificially induce Dumbledore to create negative stories, so that Professor Dumbledore can smear himself. So Fudge first learned about Hogwarts from Lucius Sr. and Draco Jr. The professor doesn't really follow the syllabus set by the Wizarding Examinations Authority when teaching. In the courses Transfiguration and Herbalism, Professor McGonagall and Professor Sprout will likely refer to the syllabus requirements for progress. For courses like Potions and Divination classes, the professor always throws the syllabus aside and pushes the course forward as he pleases, according to his own ideas. As for the Defense Against the Dark Arts course, there's no syllabus at all, and even the Wizarding Examinations Authority has practically abandoned it. After all, even the best outline is useless if you change professors every year. Fudge discovered clues and opportunities from this phenomenon. He wants to ask the Wizarding Examinations Authority to revise the syllabus so that the exam courses are no longer aggressive and practical, but rather more theoretical. In Fudge's vision, Hogwarts, professors probably wouldn't pay so much attention to the syllabus, or they would still disregard it and continue teaching in the original way. This would allow him to engage in political maneuvering, trying to distort the facts into the narrative that Dumbledore was attempting to build an army entirely composed of teenage wizards to overthrow the Ministry of Magic, thereby completely stigmatizing it. Although it sounds outrageous, given Fudge's not-so-high IQ, he thinks it's really worth a try. However, members of the Wizarding Examinations Authority naturally rejected his unreasonable request. Among them, Gershilda Macheben and Tylubes Ogden, both senior members of Wizengamot, were increasingly indignant about Fudge's attitude and actions, which accelerated the passage of the impeachment motion against Fudge. After this approach failed and only exacerbated his own downfall, Fudge had no choice but to settle for second best. Umbridge was thus promoted to Senior Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Magic and concurrently appointed Senior Investigator, and stationed in Hogwarts. The reason for Umbridge's existence is quite simple. After all, Professor Dumbledore himself admitted that in recent terms of defense against the dark arts. In Professor, Quirrell is a dark wizard who wants to steal Philosopher's Stone, Lockhart is a dark wizard who wants to inherit Slytherin's estate, and Lupin is a werewolf. This clearly demonstrates that Dumbledore made a mistake in selecting a professor, and that the Ministry of Magic has an obligation to re-evaluate the professors to ensure Hogwarts. The professor's level is excellent. That's what they say, but looking at how obsequious Umbridge was to Professor Dumbledore, Harley was starting to doubt that she was Fudge's lackey. Harley suddenly became interested in this and wanted to find out what had happened. Harley was still secretly assigning tasks to Rita and Ludo when the doors of the Great Hall opened. The first-year students entered the Great Hall, led by Professor McGonagall. Professor McGonagall was still holding that familiar old stool in his hands, the ancient sorting hat on it still covered in dust, unwashed for 1,000 years. The chatter in the Great Hall gradually subsided, and the first-year students lined up in front of the faculty table, facing students from other grades. All the teachers and students held their breath and waited quietly. Then, the slit next to the brim of the hat opened like a mouth and began to sing loudly. This year, Sorting Hat's song had the same old tune as always, but the lyrics had undergone a complete transformation. In the past, it described the differences between the four schools, praising Gryffindor lavishly, occasionally praising Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff, while subtly belittling Slytherin. This is understandable, given that the previous owner of the Sorting Hat was Gryffindor. Making cunning and treacherous remarks has become an annual tradition for Slytherins, and even the Slytherins themselves are used to it. Just take it as a form of emotional comfort, since only the most powerful villains are targeted by everyone. But this year, Sorting Hat has broken with its own persona for the first time, and it has actually started praising Slytherin. Something's wrong, something's really wrong. Even the little wizards can tell something's wrong. However, when the song reached its end, everyone understood why Sorting Hat had praised Slytherin. It turns out that this was meant to be a warning to everyone in the following song, urging everyone to unite. All I can say is that Sorting Hat sacrificed his greatest pleasure for the safety of the Hogwarts. It sacrificed so much. After the singing and sorting, Professor Dumbledore raised his hand and summoned a large amount of food that had been waiting in the kitchen. During the dinner, Hermione also asked Nick whether Sorting Hat had ever issued a similar warning in the history of Hogwarts. Of course I brought it up, Nick said, trying to recall. Whenever Sorting Hat believes that Hogwarts are in great danger, it issues a warning. And the warnings always remain the same: we hope everyone will unite and maintain internal stability. When were the first few times it issued warnings? Hermione pressed. Let me think about it carefully. Nick spun around in the air, weighing his head in his hands. I remember in the last Great Britain during the Wizarding World's Wizarding Wars, Sorting Hat issued a warning at the beginning of each school year. Going further back leads to Phineas Black. During the principal's tenure. At that time, Sorting Hat issued a very stern warning, but no one remembers the specific reason why, and it is not recorded in the school history. Anyway, Phineas Principal, his mastery of magic was exceptional, and he successfully averted the crisis. Hermione nodded thoughtfully, and Harley suddenly remembered something. Sir Nicholas, may I ask about the Dark Wizard? Did Sorting Hat issue any warnings during Grindelwald's travels across Europe? No, not at all, Nick said, scratching a patch of hair that wasn't actually there. But that's normal, since Grindelwald has always been on the European continent and has never been to Great Britain. Wizarding World. So the whole of Great Britain, Wizarding World. The wizard felt no fear of Grindelwald, the first Dark Lord. At most, he was merely curious. At the time, no one knew why Grindelwald dared not set foot in Britain. Later, someone specifically came to ask Professor Dumbledore to take action, and Professor Dumbledore successfully defeated Grindelwald. Only then did everyone realize that Grindelwald was afraid of Professor Dumbledore. Having obtained the information he wanted, Harley nodded in satisfaction. Oh ho, Grindelwald is indeed afraid of Professor Dumbledore. Thinking back on what I saw and heard during my vacation, it seems that the relationship between the two is indeed worth careful consideration. And indeed, my guess was right. Sure enough, the witch's judgment was quite accurate. Opening parenthesis. End of this chapter. 381. It's all Snape's fault. The opening banquet for the new school year ended quickly. Professor Dumbledore stood up after everyone had finished eating, and waved his wand to clear away all the remaining food on the table. All right, while everyone is still digesting this delicious meal, please be quiet for a moment. I'd like to use this time to talk about something. Professor Dumbledore said loudly. Now, as usual, I'm going to talk about the important points for the new semester. I think all the students at Hogwarts should know that students are prohibited from entering the Forbidden Forest next to the hunting grounds. Professor Dumbledore launched into a lengthy speech, focusing on the prank props that appeared at the end of the previous semester at Hogwarts. Needless to say, the conscientious Filch immediately added all the Weasley brothers' magic items to the long list of prohibited items on his office door. This made Weasley twins very unhappy, it was practically blocking their path to making money. Finally, I would like to announce some changes from the teaching staff and the school administration team. Professor Dumbledore looked towards the faculty seating area. First, I'd like to introduce Slughorn to everyone. Professor Slughorn. Professor is an internationally renowned master in the field of potting, and was Professor Snape's potting classmate when he studied at Hogwarts. Professor and Dean of Slytherin College. So this year, he will replace Professor Snape to teach everyone potion class. A burst of enthusiastic applause erupted in the Great Hall. Apart from Slytherin, few students liked Professor Snape. Seamus even made a statement to his students, believing that Professor Snape had limited his talent. If Professor Snape hadn't stared at him so coldly during every class, how could he have caused the crucible to explode every time? You're saying this is Seamus's own problem. Impossible, absolutely impossible. Other students with poor grades also blamed Professor Snape, believing that he taught poorly and was sarcastic, which affected their mood and caused their poor results. In short, it's all Professor Snape's fault. Now that Professor Snape is finally gone, they are naturally overjoyed. Of course, the little wizards didn't consider one problem. Professor Snape was no longer serving as the director of potions at this time. He's a professor, but he's also at the long table in the professors' section, so what course will he be teaching? Amid applause and cheers, Slughorn the professor, with her pregnant belly protruding, stood up, waved to the students, and smiled broadly. In addition, Professor Snape will serve as the professor for the Defense Against the Dark Arts course. Slughorn. After the professor sat down, Professor Dumbledore said with a smile. The applause in the Great Hall subsided instantly, and many students stared at Dumbledore with bewildered expressions, their hands instinctively stopping. Only the Slytherins' initial polite applause and cheers quickly grew louder, with many Slytherins standing up to cheer and applaud their dean. Professor Snape waved lazily toward the Slytherin table, glancing at the Gryffindor table, but made no further move. After all, so many eyes are watching him from below, and the identities of many of the students' parents are worth scrutinizing. He can't afford to do anything unnecessary right now. Finally, Professor Dumbledore looked at the pink toad beside him, and a humble smile immediately appeared on the toad's face. And then there's our newest member, Ms. Dolores Umbridge. She is the Senior Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Magic and will be serving as a senior investigator for Hogwarts this academic year. During this academic year, Ms. Umbridge will review whether the courses taken by each professor conform to the syllabus of the Wizarding Examinations Authority, and use this to determine whether each professor is qualified. Professor Dumbledore paused for a moment, and the pink toad quickly stood up, revealing a cloyingly sweet smile. This time, even the Slytherin applause was much quieter. Clearly, everyone was disgusted by Umbridge. But Umbridge seemed completely unconcerned, his expression barely changing as he cheerfully waved to all the little wizards without sitting down. Ms. Umbridge just told me that she hoped she could also have a short speaking time after I finished speaking, and I naturally agreed. So, let's welcome Ms. Umbridge. Professor Dumbledore led the applause, and polite applause gradually grew louder throughout the Great Hall. Along with the applause came whispers, with many students talking amongst themselves. After all, in their memory, no wizard other than Professor Dumbledore had ever spoken at the opening banquet. "Thank you, Headmaster Dumbledore, for such a warm welcome." Umbridge grinned, revealing his sharp teeth. "Oh, I must say, it's so good to be back in Hogwarts." Umbridge's voice was high-pitched and shrill, with a breathy quality, like that of an 11 or 12-year-old girl. If you ignore the face and only listen to the voice, you might be able to fool naive boys or adult witches with overflowing maternal instincts. But combined with her toad-like appearance and fluffy pink cardigan, all I can say is that she has precisely found the most disgusting way to make people feel nauseous. Several students almost vomited. After all, it was a double discomfort, both psychological and physical. After spending a full 5 minutes complimenting Professor Dumbledore and the other professors and expressing his own joy, Umbridge finally got to the point. Quote, "As Headmaster Dumbledore said, given some student complaints that the professors' lectures are too far-fetched, I will be serving as Hogwarts' senior investigator this academic year. My task is very simple. I simply verify whether the courses taught by the professors comply with the syllabus set by the Wizarding Examinations Authority. This syllabus was co-authored by several renowned wizards, and Professor Dumbledore also participated in the syllabus for the translation course, so I think it is very trustworthy." Upon hearing this, the students, who had been drowsy, became much more alert. The Ministry of Magic has finally done something worthwhile. Harley vaguely heard Ron whispering to his friends. "I've wanted to complain to the Ministry of Magic for a long time. That greasy old bat's classes are torture. Indeed, I knew my grades were bad because that old bat didn't follow the syllabus in class." Seamus's expression grew increasingly excited. "I don't believe the outline would list sarcastic or insincere language as a required tone for professors. Hopefully, Ms. Umbridge will give this greasy old bat a thorough examination." "But Professor Snape won't be teaching potion class this semester," Neville kindly reminded him. Umbridge can't trace him back to Umbridge. Reviewing defense against the dark arts is the same." Seamus hesitated for a moment. "In short, my poor academic performance must be Snape's fault. We must thoroughly investigate him. End of chapter. 382. This Is Us, Gryffindor. Despite knowing he was unpopular, the pink toad still shamelessly performed for a long time before finally sitting back down, seemingly unsatisfied. Throughout the entire process, Professor Dumbledore listened attentively to her speech, but the other professors did not give Umbridge a pleasant look. Professor McGonagall's two dark eyebrows furrowed tightly together, and in a short time, the lion turned into an eagle. Professor Snape made no attempt to hide his sneer, and every student below could notice his impatience. Even the usually mild-mannered Professor Flitwick had begun to appreciate his own wand, and for the first time, an impatient look appeared on his face. When he occasionally glanced at Umbridge, his eyes held a clear look of disgust. This is quite unusual, considering that Professor Flitwick has always been the best-tempered professor in the entire Hogwarts, even better than Professor Sprout. Professor Sprout might occasionally get angry because students don't appreciate herbs, but no one has ever seen Professor Sprout angry. As for the students, the little wizards were already engrossed in their own tasks at their desks, their attention completely focused on Avalon. Aside from the fact that everyone took it seriously when Umbridge said he would be reviewing professors, and excitedly fantasized about their disliked professors being reviewed, who would listen attentively to such a boring speech. After Umbridge finally sat down, Professor Dumbledore was the first to clap, but the others only clapped once or twice before putting their hands down. "A very insightful speech," Professor Dumbledore said calmly. "This reminds me of when I first became principal. It has to be said, a principal is a principal." He managed to make even the most boring speech by the pink toad sound interesting. "That's why they're called principal. That's what you call skill." After the school song was sung, the opening banquet finally came to an end. This year, Harley can't just stroll around with Hermione and take the shortcut back to the common room. As the perfect, she must guide the new students to the Gryffindor Tower. Moreover, seeing Neville's panicked and somewhat insecure demeanor, Harley felt that she would probably have to take on all the work herself. When Harley first entered the school, it was Percy who was in charge of guiding the new students at Gryffindor. Perfect. However, Percy's guidance was really boring. He did nothing extra and simply led the freshmen to the common room and then dismissed them. How can this be allowed? Cultivating students' sense of honor in the college should clearly start from the freshmen. Harley led the students through the corridors, up the steps, and through a hidden door, while also teaching Peeves a lesson for trying to ambush the new students of Gryffindor. I don't know if this is a regular feature of Peeves, but Peeves basically come every year to target the newcomers of Gryffindor. However, this year, Peeves probably didn't notice who the team's perfect was, so he was directly turned into a ball by Harley's magic and sent flying far away. This filled the freshmen's eyes with anticipation. This senior was so cool. Especially with a senior student standing next to her who looked helpless and had a simple, honest expression. This made the senior student leading the group appear even more elegant. After entering the common room, Harley did not immediately disband the group, but instead began to lead the group of freshmen on a tour of the Gryffindor common room, while explaining the layout. The portraits on the walls of the lounge, in particular, were a key focus of Harley's descriptions. After all, the wizards whose portraits are displayed on the walls of the common room are all from Gryffindor, and they become famous after graduation, making them the most precious spiritual wealth of Gryffindor College. Percy's method of leading new students was simply too low-level. Harley felt that her method would be much more effective in strengthening the new students' sense of identity and honor with Gryffindor. This action was indeed effective. Along the way, Harley had already sensed some of the anchors coming from the group of newcomers in front of her. What is the logo of Gryffindor College? After leading the new students on a tour of the common room, Harley stood in front of the fireplace, facing the enthusiastic new students below. It's a lion. The lion, the king of beasts, symbolizing our courage and adventurous spirit. The representative colors of the Gryffindor Academy are gold and red, which represent the element of fire in the alchemy system, corresponding to the wind of Ravenclaw, the earth of Hufflepuff, and the water of Slytherin. This also means that we Gryffindors are passionate like a raging fire, we love and hate fiercely, we value friendship, and when facing enemies, we burn like a raging flame. As students of Gryffindor, I hope you can unleash the courage buried deep within your hearts, demonstrate your own boldness, spirit, and generosity, prove the excellence of Gryffindor College, and prove yourselves to be qualified Gryffindors. Of course, Harley paused. Bravery is not recklessness, so you must think things through before you act. I don't want to hear people from other colleges making fun of Gryffindor students as a bunch of stupid lions every day. However, as long as what you decide to do is the right thing, then go for it with confidence. Gryffindor will always be your strongest support. After a pep talk, the freshmen were extremely excited, and their drowsiness after the meal had vanished. Although this excitement only lasts a few days before being completely worn down by Hogwarts' diverse professors. However, this does not prevent Harley's illustrious image from leaving a permanent mark and anchor in their hearts. The other students in the Gryffindor common room who were doing their homework were stunned, and their pens involuntarily stopped. How can perfect guide newcomers like this? Why was my own perfect so useless back then? Harley is a much better perfect than you were back then. Fred was hunched over his desk doing his homework. When he noticed Harley giving the freshmen some motivational pep talk, he nudged Angelina's arm. Shut up. Angelina glared at Fred fiercely, while pinching his inner thigh hard. Fred let out a terrible scream and hurriedly apologized to Angelina. 383 Defense against the curse of the dark arts. After the students left, the Great Hall was soon empty. The teachers all returned to their private offices, leaving in twos and threes, except for the unpleasant pink toad, which was ignored by everyone. However, Umbridge didn't seem to care at all. At least his expression remained normal as he returned to his office alone. Although Umbridge is a senior investigator in the Ministry of Magic, she is theoretically considered one of the professors as well. So Umbridge also has its own office, originally for defense against the dark arts. The professor's office. After taking over the Defense Against the Dark Arts course, Professor Snape refused to change locations, continuing to use his basement office, and conveniently swapped the teaching locations for Defense Against the Dark Arts and Potion class. In Slughorn the professor, however, felt that the original office of Defense Against the Dark Arts was not impressive enough, did not match his status, and did not allow him to enjoy life. So he applied to Headmaster Dumbledore to have his old office reopened. It's a high-altitude office where you can see Quidditch pitch from the window and enjoy the sunlight every morning. The vice principal in charge of the school's teaching funds, Professor McGonagall, always frugal, couldn't stand seeing the Defense Against the Dark Arts office sitting idle. Although this office is disliked by both people and dogs, it would be a waste to just leave it like this, especially since Umbridge needs a place to live. So after careful consideration, Professor McGonagall, kindly and generously, assigned it to Umbridge. Anyway, whether people dislike it or dogs hate it doesn't stop toads from living there, right? Maybe toads are more suited to this kind of environment. Professor McGonagall even praised himself for his ingenuity and decided to reward himself by using the saved funds to buy 2 more pieces of magic material so he could conduct 1 more transfiguration experiment. Umbridge quickly returned to his office, slammed the door shut, and casually hung a black and gold necklace on the doorknob. The necklace was covered with numerous pale purple patterns. When the chain touched the doorknob, a sense of separation from the castle immediately arose within the room. This sense of disconnect appeared only for a moment, quickly becoming associated with the dark arts on the upper level of a castle, before vanishing without a trace. Meanwhile, in a room in the castle, a jet black, mist-like magic suddenly surged and filled the entire room. The room was instantly filled with golden light, which compressed the black mist, confining it to a small area. However, the golden light did not succeed completely. The black mist-shaped magic seemed to be growing stronger and was gradually eroding the space occupied by the golden magic. This kind of erosion is not powerful in terms of sheer force, but it is like a maggot that gnaws into the bone, impossible to erase or get rid of, and extremely disgusting. After a moment, the room returned to silence. Original Defense Against the Dark Arts in the professor's office. Umbridge sat down at the desk after hanging up the necklace. The office had been completely transformed. Everything was now covered with lace-trimmed cloths and tablecloths. Several vases filled with dried flowers were placed on top of the cabinet, with delicate little cushions underneath them. A set of decorative plates hangs on one wall, each plate featuring a large, colorful cat with a different bow around its neck. These cats look quite tempting to pet, but combined with the surrounding environment, it's just disgusting. Umbridge fiddled with the ornaments for a few moments, her face filled with girlish delight, before finally waving her wand to summon the letter paper and quill pen. It was late at night, but her task was not yet complete. She still needed to report to Fudge and her new master. Given that Fudge was too busy fighting for power to have any time to consult Slytherin's little wizards, Umbridge naturally wrote freely on the letter. In her words, her obsequious behavior at the Hogwarts opening banquet transformed into arrogance, and the entire Hogwarts felt the Ministry of Magic's determination and were greatly intimidated. At the same time, Umbridge assured Fudge that he would have evidence against Dumbledore within 6 months at most, and successfully bring him down. After finishing writing the letter and sending it out, Umbridge watched the owl fly away, a malicious expression on his face. After a while, she suddenly came to her senses and rolled up the sleeve of her left arm. The sleeve had probably been modified, being a size looser than the right sleeve, but the cuff at the wrist was firmly attached to Umbridge's skin without any gaps. After the sleeves were rolled up, Umbridge's left arm was exposed to the light. There's a dark mark there. However, this dark mark is different from other Death Eater's dark marks. The giant python emerging from the skull's mouth seems to have come to life. At that moment, the python's 2 teeth seemed to have a 3-dimensional quality, disappearing beneath Umbridge's skin. Every so often, some blood would seep out from where the teeth and skin met, only to be quickly swallowed up by the dark mark. Umbridge gritted his teeth and pressed down hard on the dark mark. At the same time, her toad-like face instantly became full of respect and obedience, and her originally delicate, squeaky voice returned to normal. My greatest master, your most loyal servant Umbridge reports on the progress of the mission. I've already infiltrated the Hogwarts, and once I'm settled, I can go find that item. Dumbledore doesn't completely trust me and remains somewhat wary of me, while the other professors are also hostile towards me. However, Fudge still trusts me. I didn't see her. Sybil Trelawney didn't show up at the opening banquet, but my current position makes it easier for me to keep an eye on him. Yes, your most loyal servant will certainly complete the task assigned by your great master without the slightest mistake, even at the cost of his life. A moment later, Umbridge covered the mark on his sleeve again and took the necklace off the door, hiding it deep inside the box. At the same time, in the headmaster's office, Professor Dumbledore was sitting behind a table in his bathrobe, with a copy of Transfiguration Today open in front of him and a special beverage in his hand, made with honey and water in a ratio of nearly 10:1, which looked incredibly thick. However, he frowned at this moment, did not read the book, and did not drink his favorite special honey water. Professor Dumbledore simply stared straight ahead, his gaze seemingly penetrating the walls and reaching into a room on the same floor. Opening parenthesis. End of this chapter. 384. As everyone knows, Hogwarts is the safest place in the world. Resuming daily updates. As is widely known, Hogwarts is one of the safest places in the world. Regardless of whether others acknowledge it or not, Great Britain. This is the opinion of Wizarding World's wizards, especially loyal fans of Professor Dumbledore, represented by Hagrid. Moreover, judging from the data on paper alone, Hogwarts is indeed very safe. Here you'll find the world's most powerful wizard. Dumbledore served as principal, personally overseeing the area, and included Phoenix, one of only 2 people in the world to follow the wizard. Fawkes, as the mobile vanguard, has 4 deans who are professors with top-tier combat power even in the wizarding world. Regardless of whether it's a fake galactic warship or not, just tell me how strong it is on paper. With such a powerful wizard guarding it, Hogwarts is naturally the safest place in the world, which makes perfect sense. As for your point about Hogwarts frequently wearing out, defense against the dark arts. Professor, in 1991, was invaded by the Dark Wizard who stole Philosopher's Stone. In 1992, the Basilisk ravaged the area. In 1993, the area was filled with Dementors. In 1994, a series of dangerous events occurred on the Triwizard Tournament. These are all accidents. Please don't let a large number of isolated cases influence your opinion of Hogwarts. Whether you admit it or not, Hogwarts remains one of the safest places in the world, as safe as District 13 in the Muggle of North America. In order to maintain its reputation as the safest place in the world, Professor Dumbledore will have to work even harder. Professor Dumbledore has a good habit of periodically checking Hogwarts Castle using his principal privileges to ensure the school's security. During each test, Professor Dumbledore was able to detect traces of the magic that Lord Voldemort had placed on the Defense Against the Dark Arts course. The curse was simple: no one could serve as defense against the dark arts. The professor position has been held for more than a year. The curse itself is simple, but the method to achieve it is not so simple. After all, being in a bad mood can prevent a wizard from serving as a professor, and permanent amnesia or a 360-degree rightward twist of the neck can also prevent a wizard from serving in this position, right? In the first few years after the curse appeared, the professors in Defense Against the Dark Arts were still able to resist the curse and did not need to be replaced every year. These lucky individuals typically teach for 5 to 6 years before finding teaching tedious and boring for various reasons, and then resigning due to psychological issues. However, by the middle of the game, when the curse had become even more powerful, the professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts struggled to survive even a year. Fortunately, most of the professors at that time only developed more serious psychological problems, such as being unable to adapt to the students' mischievousness and liveliness, which is why they resigned within a year. Now, the situation is much worse. For details, you can refer to the situation a few years ago, where Professor Quirrell and Professor Lockhart from Hell greet you. If Lupin and Moody hadn't stopped in time, they probably would have ended up in the hospital. Professor Dumbledore was also powerless to address this phenomenon. At first, when the curse was not very harmful, its magic was unusually mild, so the inexperienced Dumbledore did not notice it. Professor Dumbledore only discovered the existence of the curse after it had grown stronger over time. But by then, he no longer had the ability to lift the curse. This curse, however, is now completely intertwined with the position of Defense Against the Dark Arts and Lord Voldemort's life, and even Professor Dumbledore's principal authority is powerless to change it. Tonight, Professor Dumbledore suddenly sensed that the fluctuations of the curse seemed to have become even stronger at a certain moment. Strange, is it just my imagination? Professor Dumbledore muttered to himself, standing up from his chair. The elderberry wand suddenly appeared in his hand. Professor Dumbledore waved it gently, and the silverware on the table made a clinking sound. It seems that resolving this curse is of utmost urgency. Professor Dumbledore stared at the white mist emanating from the silverware. It just so happens that Severus has now completely gained Tom's trust and has become the professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts. And Harley's magic skills are already so strong, and Horcrux. Harley was unaware that Professor Dumbledore was planning to use child labor again. If she had known, she would definitely have said, "Well done." Harley has been interested in the curse associated with the Defense Against the Dark Arts course for a long time. However, Professor Dumbledore didn't immediately go to Harley, and Harley was preoccupied with something else. That means the regular wizard level exam is coming up. The exams themselves were no challenge for Harley. Even the most mystical divination class, the witch could easily complete with her magic mirror divination. But the difficulty lies not in that, but in Hermione. Hermione started nagging in Harley's ear from the very first night, and even seemed a little anxious. The following morning, after Hermione had assisted Professor McGonagall in distributing the class schedules, her worries and anxieties filled the entire Great Hall. Today was so busy: 2 History of Magic classes, 2 Potion classes, 2 Arithmancy classes, and 2 Defense Against the Dark Arts classes. Hermione flipped through the class schedule, quickly making plans. This year is still Owl's year, so the professor's courses will definitely be a step up in difficulty. I don't know Slughorn yet. The professor's teaching style makes it impossible to prepare for lessons in advance. What's there to worry about? Harley seemed completely unconcerned. This little course can't possibly stump my Hermione, can it? You actually learned all the 7th grade material last semester. It's not the same. Hermione shook her head vigorously. Learning knowledge and being able to pass an exam are 2 different concepts. Looks like I need to optimize my study schedule. I have to go to the library tonight. Watching Harley leisurely spreading butter on her bread, Hermione suddenly reached out and pinched Harley's cheek hard. You can't be so careless. This year is the most important year for us. What courses we can take in the advanced class and what careers we can choose in the future are all closely related to this exam. Harley, don't think that just because you won the Magical School Potion Championship, the Triwizard Tournament, and the International Wizarding Duel Competition, you can be careless about the exams. Hermione quickly got into the swing of things and launched a furious critique of Harley. The Gryffindor students nearby were so frightened that they quickly moved their stools away, trying to get as far away from this troublesome place as possible. Hermione's hurtful words are best left for Harley to hear alone. They are just innocent, ordinary students who shouldn't have to endure such pain. Opening parenthesis. End of this chapter. 385 Great Britain Wizarding World Potion Documentary. Hermione's preaching has always been terrifying. After all, she is a witch nicknamed Little McGonagall. As everyone knows, there are no wrong nicknames, only wrong names. This is an irrefutable truth. Even Harley could only lower his head and listen obediently when faced with Hermione's lectures, not daring to talk back at all. This scene inexplicably evokes a very strange feeling. Even if you achieve everything in the world, in front of your mother, you are still a child. Fortunately, it wasn't too long before the first History of Magic class, so Hermione's mental state didn't last long, sparing Harley a lot of torture. The History of Magic class program remained largely unchanged from previous years, and the little wizards, of course, had no expectations for it. Professor Binns remained hovering above the podium, recounting the giant war in a panting, drawn-out voice. Almost no students in the class were paying attention, most were either drowsy or fidgeting. However, the students' mental state was completely different when they came to the next potion class. Perhaps because they had caught up on a good night's sleep, the little wizards of Gryffindor were all particularly energetic. Of course, the more important reason is that the professor teaching this course has finally changed. God knows how much the little lions of Gryffindor want to replace Professor Snape. As for the new professor, even if he's bad, can he really be as bad as that old bat Snape? For the little lions, who have been targeted for a long time, they are already at rock bottom. No matter which way they go, it's all upwards. The little snakes weren't particularly disappointed, since Professor Snape was still in Hogwarts and could continue to favor Slytherin, giving Slytherin points. And I heard Slughorn Professor was Slytherin's former dean and a longtime Slytherin. This made them less resistant to the new professor, and even somewhat expectant. What if, and I mean just what if, this new professor is just as fiercely protective of his own as Professor Snape? What if he also doesn't care about what others think and actively tries to boost Slytherin's reputation? That would be a huge win. Slytherin defeats Gryffindor, and regaining the Academy Cup is just around the corner. As the students filed into the classroom, Slughorn the professor was already standing on the podium with a smile on his face. Unlike Professor Snape, the potion classroom at this time was not filled with cold air like the underground classroom, but rather with a warm atmosphere. In the corner of the classroom, there were crucibles, the liquid inside of which emitted various colored steam and strange smells. The students in Gryffindor and Slytherin couldn't help but whisper among themselves, discussing the potions. Please be quiet, everyone. After the school bell rang, Slughorn the professor closed the classroom door and then clapped his hands. His body trembled, and his large belly shook constantly, as if it might jump out from under his shirt at any moment. Albus has already introduced himself at the opening banquet, but I would like to introduce myself again. My name is Horace Slughorn, and starting this semester I will be replacing Severus as your potion class teacher. Professor, I hope we can all get along well in the future. Before we get into the lecture content, I need to remind you that you will be taking a very important exam next June. Then you will have to prove how much you have learned about configuring and using potion. Although I don't know exactly how well you learned in the past, I do know that Severus is a potions master of considerable skill, and his teaching of you must have been very effective. For the next 20 minutes, Slughorn the professor spent a full minute boasting about Professor Snape's high level of potency. He then smoothly changed the subject, spending the remaining 19 minutes boasting about his position as Snape's potion class. The title of professor. This made the students feel somewhat embarrassed, as they felt their expectations had been wasted. Even Harley, who was watching Slughorn, was embarrassed. The professor's gaze even seemed a little off. After all, Harley knew some of what happened back then, at least Sirius had told her quite a few stories. If she remembered correctly, Slughorn the professor didn't pay any attention to Snape at all, focusing most of his attention on his mother. At that time, for Lily, Slughorn the professor began by referring to his most admired student. As for Professor Snape, Slughorn at most, the professor would only remember that she was Lily's close potion guest partner only before 5th grade. Now that Professor Snape has the results, he's taking all the credit. Fine, Slughorn. Professor, why don't you write a book called Great Britain? Wizarding World, Potion Documentary. No special meaning, please don't make wild guesses. After boasting about himself, Slughorn the professor belatedly began to emphasize the importance of the regular wizard level exams and stated that he would only accept students with good grades into the advanced class. His long speech caused many students to slump onto their desks, idly fiddling with their quill pens and textbooks. Just when the students thought this was another Lockhart-style professor and were greatly disappointed, Slughorn. The professor finally ended the long pre-class discussion and got to the main content of the lesson. It has to be said that a veteran professor is a veteran professor. Slughorn the professor easily controlled the pace of the class, quickly piquing the students' interest by introducing the topic of potion, which is a common subject in several wizard-level exams, and then smoothly leading into the main topic. In Slughorn, unlike Professor Snape, when teaching students under 6th grade, he would analyze the specific characteristics of potion, explain the principles and key details of its preparation, and only then would he let the students practice. In practice, he doesn't act sarcastic like Professor Snape. Instead, he calmly points out students' problems and tells them how to remedy them. After a potion class, most of the students actually manage to concoct a soothing agent, a type of potion that appears most frequently in ordinary wizard-level exams. It's worth noting that even with such a simple pose, very few people can usually succeed in the potion class. Even Neville, who consistently ranks at the bottom of the potions course, managed to produce a semi-finished product, which greatly surprised the chubby boy, giving him a boost of confidence. Unfortunately, as always, Seamus caused the crucible to explode, scattering the failed potions everywhere. The students were used to this and didn't say much about it. Only Slughorn the professor stood alone in front of the table with his hands behind his back, staring at the crucible fragments and potion residue on the table, frowning and thinking for a long time. He still couldn't figure out why the pot of potting mix exploded when the students handed in their assignments. Even if he blindfolded himself and randomly put the materials together, he wouldn't be able to create an explosive effect from the combination of materials with stable potency. After class, Gryffindor's dean couldn't help but sigh. Sure enough, there was a reason why I didn't do well on potions before. Everything is like that greasy old bat. If only they changed the potions. Professor, I've been a potion class genius for ages. His words were agreed upon by many little wizards, and even many of the Slytherin's little snakes silently nodded in agreement. Although I feel very sorry for Professor Snape, I have to admit that Slughorn. The professor's teaching is really good. What Professor Snape? I don't know him, I really don't know him. Only Seamus looked dejected, as if he had confirmed some truths he had never wanted to admit. Now that things have come to this, he has to admit, it seems that his strange explosive talent really is his own problem. I knew it. Professor Snape's teaching methods are definitely problematic. During lunch, Hermione also shared her thoughts. If Professor Snape insists on teaching, I think his teaching style is more suitable for supervising graduate students. Well, I mean those who want to continue their in-depth study of magic after graduating from Hogwarts. For students at Hogwarts who are equivalent to middle school age, Professor Snape's teaching methods, to be honest, I think he's really terrible. However, what Hermione didn't notice was that Harley had already put down her knife and fork, produced a quill pen and a piece of parchment, and recorded her words in their entirety. I will tell Professor Snape your evaluation. After Hermione had finished speaking, Harley spoke in a serious tone, waving the parchment in his hand. Hermione was taken aback, then enraged, and lunged forward menacingly. No, I won't allow it. Hand over the evidence. Harley was caught off guard and was directly tackled by Hermione while dribbling the ball, leaving him completely powerless to resist. Finally, under pressure from both physical and psychological forces, Harley had no choice but to obediently hand over the parchment, allowing Hermione to end its sinful life. The students at Gryffindor were excited for the entire afternoon, happy that they would no longer be bothered by Professor Snape's sarcastic remarks. It wasn't until the afternoon class bell rang that everyone suddenly remembered that there was a Defense Against the Dark Arts class today. What a terrible thing. As the students of Gryffindor reluctantly left the divination classroom and joined the other elective students in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, Professor Snape was lazily fiddling with a wand in his hand. This familiar underground classroom has changed its shape for the first time, although it is still in the shape of Professor Snape. The classroom curtains were drawn tightly, preventing any light from the corridor from getting in. Only the candlelight emitted a faint glow. The candlelight was a pale purple, giving it a deep and mysterious feel. The large amount of potion materials that used to be placed in the classroom have disappeared, replaced by many terrifying pictures. The images showed people suffering, gruesome wounds, and bizarrely twisted body parts. Harley even spotted an acquaintance from last semester among them. The old acquaintance's left arm had completely turned into tentacles, his right hand had grown 8 fingers, his palm had an open mouth, his body was covered with fleshy buds and extra eyes, and his hair and scalp had completely fallen off, revealing blood-red human tissue, making him look extremely miserable. Harley couldn't help but shake her head. If she remembered correctly, the poor, well-off player seemed to have stayed in one of Hogwarts' underground chambers for a long time, only returning after Mahoutokuro's team left. Tisk tisk tisk, it seems Professor Snape's hands weren't exactly innocent either. He must have secretly studied Tsuchimikato Haruiki's corpse more than once during that period. However, Harley was ultimately a kind witch, with a compassionate heart, and could not bear to see such a tragic scene. So, she chose to turn her head away and not look. Hurry up and come in. Seeing many students still moving unsteadily and leisurely, Professor Snape frowned. Before class begins, I have something to say to you all, and I hope you can all concentrate fully. His dark eyes quickly swept over the youthful face below, lingering only briefly on Harley's face, as if he were avoiding something. You've had many teachers for this course so far, Professor Snape said slowly, pacing the podium. It makes me feel very awkward. After all, I taught you the potion class, and I know that most of you are not even as smart as the goblins in the garden, and at most only a tiny bit better than the trolls in the Forbidden Forest. And these teachers, each of them has their own teaching style and focus. In such a chaotic situation, I don't have much hope for your regular wizard-level exams. However, I still hope that you will use your brains in every class, listen carefully to my lectures, and pass the OWL's exam smoothly. Now let's get down to business. Dark arts is a diverse and numerous genre. Professor Snape spoke of dark arts with obvious fondness and admiration, using portraits as examples to illustrate his points. Putting aside personal subjective opinions, the Gryffindors have to admit that Professor Snape has a very profound understanding of dark arts. From a professor's perspective alone, he is a professor I'm much more comfortable teaching Defense Against the Dark Arts than potion class. However, just as Professor Snape was beaming with excitement, there was a sudden knock on the classroom door. And before Professor Snape could respond, the door was opened. A toad-like face adorned with a pink bow peeked in. Hello Professor Snape, I'm here too. Before she could finish speaking, a spell flew over and slammed into the pink toad's forehead. Umbridge screamed and slammed heavily against the wall across the corridor. In the classroom, the students who had been somewhat listless instantly perked up, and many respectful gazes turned to Professor Snape, who was still holding the wand on the podium. Professor Snape remained calm, blowing on his wand tip as if he had simply done something mundane. 386A Toad, that's neither inside nor outside. Although there was a slight hiccup earlier, the bell for the end of get out of class has not yet rung, so the class will continue. In the classroom of Defense Against the Dark Arts, Umbridge's face was full of sorrow. At this moment, she was pouting her big lips and sitting in the last row of the classroom, looking aggrieved. If Harley wore that aggrieved expression, it would be incredibly alluring and instantly attract a lot of attention. At the ball in Backland, where noble ladies and young women gather, Harley would instantly become the center of attention. When she encounters these clueless underage little wizards, she is always surrounded by a large group of people, both boys and girls, who come to show their concern. But if that expression were on Umbridge, the students would just feel disgusted and want to vomit, wanting to curse Umbridge. Quote, "How old are you? What are your circumstances? Why are you still acting like a child? Aren't you disgusting? Do you really believe the compliments from those sycophantic employees at the Ministry of Magic? When Umbridge sat down in the last row, feeling quite pleased with herself, the area around her was instantly cleared, even more effective than a barrier spell. Those students, whose grades were among the worst in the grade, even little wizards, who usually preferred to sit in the last row, consciously moved to the front. After all, when Umbridge walked over earlier, grimacing, she had forced herself to give them what she thought was a beautiful and charming smile despite the pain. That expression was far too cruel for these 15-year-old children. I'll sit a little further forward, it's better than feeling disgusted sitting next to a pink toad. In front of Umbridge, who occupied the entire last row, lay a thick pink notebook and several quill pens of the same color, fully demonstrating the truth that poor students have more stationery. Of course, she didn't take any notes on what Professor Snape was saying. Instead, she rubbed the back of her head with a pained expression. A large lump had somehow appeared in that clump of curly hair. The lump had an eerie deep purple color, and pus seemed to be flowing out of it, making it look particularly gruesome. Umbridge tried every trick in the book, but still couldn't get rid of the packet. Professor Snape firmly stated that he was simply demonstrating defense against the dark arts to his students and happened to hit Umbridge, using the most commonly used stupefy. The fact that Umbridge has undergone such an unpredictable change must be because there is something wrong with her. Therefore, it's impossible for him to help break the curse. In short, since it wasn't caused by his spell, why should Professor Snape help break the curse? As for wanting to treat with potion, I'm a teacher at Defense Against the Dark Arts. Why would you come to me with a question about potion? Umbridge was quite indignant about this, but dared not speak out. After all, she was carrying a curse from Lord Voldemort, and Umbridge was afraid that if he acted arrogantly, he might attract Dumbledore's attention, and then he would have nowhere to turn. Moreover, she harbored a faint suspicion that Lord Voldemort had cast a spell on her, which caused this anomaly. With a guilty conscience, Umbridge could only accept his bad luck. Professor Snape, of course, wouldn't care what an insignificant bug like Umbridge thought of him. He remained calm, earnestly analyzing the pictures on the wall for the students, and occasionally waving his wand to summon a rat to conduct live experiments on some less dangerous spells. It's clear that Umbridge wanted to express some unfriendly opinions about this teaching method, but he didn't dare to speak up. The Gryffindor and Hufflepuff's little wizards sitting below watched with delight. I never expected Professor Snape to be so decisive and efficient, teaching that disgusting toad a lesson. For little Lions and Badger, watching the drama unfold is pure bliss. The fact that Umbridge was severely beaten by Professor Snape on his first day of attending a class caused quite a stir in Hogwarts. After all, more than 1,000 underage little wizards were kept in a castle and had no entertainment activities. At most, they could play wizard chess in private and could only go to Hogsmeade once every few weekends. With everyone so bored they're practically growing weeds, all sorts of quirky gossip naturally become the little wizards' favorite entertainment. Normally, if gossip starts circulating in the afternoon, it will spread throughout the entire school in a completely new version by dinner time. The gossip tonight is spreading faster than in previous years, and it's also become more outrageous. Before dinner, Harley overheard Susan and Hannah telling others how Professor Snape easily knocked the toad away with one move. After dinner, Harley overheard the first-year little wizards confidently describing to their friends how Professor Snape used various spells to hang Umbridge in the classroom and whip him mercilessly. Their expressions of certainty made Harley wonder if her memory was playing tricks on her. This news is absolutely outrageous. It seems that Professor Snape is still unpopular, so everyone is trying to fan the flames and get Professor Snape and Umbridge to go head-to-head. Ideally, Professor Snape would be caught red-handed by Umbridge and fired, and then Umbridge would be beaten into street. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries by the enraged Professor Snape, forcing him to leave Hogwarts permanently. If that were the case, it would be absolutely perfect. However, Umbridge did not clash directly with Professor Snape as the students had hoped, and even stopped attending Defense Against the Dark Arts classes. Umbridge never stepped into the underground classrooms again, at most he would just linger at the stairwell. This gave Umbridge another nickname besides, Pink Toad, Weak Toad Snake. The Weasley twins uncovered Umbridge's illustrious past at Hogwarts in just one night, and pinpointed her identity as Slytherin. It can only be said that this nickname truly embodies the spirit of Gryffindor College, both attacking Umbridge and simultaneously disgusting Slytherin. This infuriated Slytherin snakes, and Umbridge's conflict with her dean and subsequent cowardly behavior made them want to expel her from the institution. Umbridge also felt wronged, and she really wanted to confront Professor Snape directly. Since he had the legitimate reason given by Fudge, Dumbledore couldn't target him. Surely I, the esteemed senior deputy minister of the Ministry of Magic, with Lord Voldemort's backing, would fear a mere newcomer to the defense against the dark arts. Professor. As a result, on the very night the conflict occurred, she had just returned to her office from the university hospital when Lord Voldemort subjected her to a severe remote ordeal. Snape, being a high-ranking Death Eater, naturally knew Umbridge's identity. He promptly filed a complaint, accusing Umbridge of reckless behavior that could potentially ruin his espionage mission. Thus, the Pink Toad, tormented by Crucio for a full half-hour, remembered the order to stay away from Snape, at the cost of an eternally etched scar on its spirit. Umbridge also kept quiet for a while, and didn't do anything too active in the following week. On the weekend evening of the first week of school, Hermione stayed out late because she had to discuss her paper on arithmetic divination with Professor Victor. Having no other usual pastimes, Harley, who was alone, finished washing up early and went to bed. On her pillow lay a large, yellowed book containing the ancient magic spell, the mantra of unwavering loyalty. Unfortunately, before Harley could even look at the first word, she felt a weight on her head. "Fox, watch out, I just washed my hair," Harley said calmly without looking up, but her voice was inexplicably intimidating. Fox was so startled that he jumped down and landed on the book. "Hey!" Harley grabbed Fox by the scruff of its neck and lifted it up. "Fox, this is an antique from over 100 years ago, found in Sirius's library. If you dare to damage this precious book, I'll have Professor Dumbledore withhold your honey candy for a month." Fox trembled in fright, meekly whimpering, and flew to Harley's shoulder, nuzzling against him affectionately. "So what do you want? Professor Dumbledore won't give you any more candy, so you came here looking for food." After flicking Fox on the forehead, Harley asked softly. Fox quickly shook its head, clearly not daring to speak ill of its master, while simultaneously letting out a chirping sound that fluctuated in pitch. "Professor Dumbledore wants me to come over." Harley couldn't help but rub his temples. "Come on, does he have no sense of time? It's so late, I was just about to get my beauty sleep." Fox glanced at the book and thick notebook in front of him and couldn't help but let out a sarcastic shout. "Oh, it's just a bedtime pastime." Harley noticed Fox's behavior, but her expression remained unchanged. "What? You have a problem with that?" Seeing little Phoenix start to cower and act pitiful again, Harley stopped teasing Fox and just looked mournful. "Sigh, Principal has so much energy. Looks like he'll be busy again tonight." A moment later, Harley appeared in the headmaster's office with Fox, assistants. Professor Dumbledore, wearing a wool nightgown knitted by Harley last year and a wool nightcap knitted by Harley the year before, was lounging unceremoniously in a chair, showing off to the portraits on the ceiling. The old men were glaring and bristling, clearly quite angry with Professor Dumbledore. Upon seeing Harley's arrival, the old principals were used to it and had no intention of pretending. Only Professor Dumbledore still had some regard for his dignity as a teacher, and quickly sat up straight. Harley glanced at the ceiling, then at his hat, then at the open jar of cockroaches and the black cockroach candies jumping around in the glass jar. He didn't say anything, just shook his head and sighed heavily. However, it must be said that Professor Dumbledore truly lived up to his title of principal. He didn't blush or pant, coughed twice forcefully, and acted as if nothing had happened. "Harley, you're here." "Yes, I'm here. You shouldn't have come." Harley looked at Professor Dumbledore with a bewildered expression, feeling offended. "Didn't you send Fox to the girls' dormitory in the middle of the night to drag me out of bed? How did it become that I shouldn't have come?" "Ahem, sorry." Professor Dumbledore's face showed embarrassment as he waved the book in his hand. "Gellert has been really bored lately, so he's become obsessed with Muggle novels from the East and recommended them to me. I ended up getting a little addicted to it, and just now I couldn't resist imitating a part of the dialogue." Harley looked completely bewildered, but considering Professor Dumbledore's unreliable nature, she could only sigh and change the subject. "So, Professor, you called me here in the middle of the night just to have me act out a scene from a novel?" "Of course not." Professor Dumbledore's expression quickly returned to seriousness. He stood up from behind his desk and took an old box from the shelf. Professor Dumbledore pulled a thin booklet from the box, on which was written a line of small print. "Hogwarts Professor Roster. Albus Dumbledore's Dark Arts Defense Professor Roster. Take a look at this first." Professor Dumbledore nodded helplessly at Harley. "Don't look at me like that. I haven't been subjected to any powerful memory charm, and I won't have any aftereffects." Harley then turned her attention back to the roster in her hand and quickly flipped through it. "You won't believe it until you see it, and what you find will shock you." The roster used to change names every 5 or 6 pages, but by the middle, it was almost one name per page. Moreover, the reasons for leaving were either depression or mental exhaustion. In the last dozen or so pages, very few of the wizards who appeared on the list met a good end. The most outrageous reason Harley saw for a professor's death was that he was whipped away by a poisonous tentacle in the Forbidden Forest, and then gored to death by a Tepa warthog. This is unbelievable. How can someone with this level of skill be a professor in defense against the dark arts? When Harley turned to the last few pages, some familiar names appeared: Quirrell, Gilderoy Lockhart, Lime Lupin, Alistair Moody, and Severus Snape. The first two were already dead, and their deaths were extremely gruesome. The last two were only able to survive thanks to their high magic resistance. As for Professor Snape, his teaching experience is limited to his first week. Harley returned the roster to Professor Dumbledore, while sighing with admiration. This isn't a roster, it's practically a death squad. 387 The curse erased. So, Professor, you had Fawkes wake me up in the middle of the night just so I could mourn with you these unlucky former professors. Harley watched as Professor Dumbledore put away the professor roster and couldn't help but complain. Of course not. Professor Dumbledore shrugged. Do I look like such an unreliable person? Under the rather strange gazes of Harley, Fawkes, and the other old principal portraitists around him, Professor Dumbledore knew this topic was not in his best interest. So he coughed twice and got to the point. Cough, cough, cough. Harley, after looking at the previous roster, do you feel that Hogwarts, Defense Against the Dark Arts, are professors being replaced too frequently? That's definitely too fast, Harley nodded. Starting from the middle of your tenure, you've basically had to change professors every year. Moreover, the further along the way, the greater the probability of professors' sacrifice. They all become disposable items, which is truly tragic. No, it's not that bad. Professor Dumbledore shook his head repeatedly. Look, quite a few people have survived. Uncle Remus is a werewolf, with very high magic resistance, Harley retorted mercilessly. Professor Moody is a seasoned Auror with exceptional experience, and his magic level is far superior to that of the other professors. 10 years ago, I didn't see a single professor leave this castle alive. Professor Dumbledore tried to cover up his mistake by gulping down several mouthfuls of honey water, but ended up coughing from the viscous liquid. I just want to use this abnormal death data to tell you that the rumors circulating among students that Defense Against the Dark Arts course is cursed are true. After calming down, Professor Dumbledore explained with a serious expression. This curse comes from my good-for-nothing student Tom, and tonight, we're going to break it. So you really hate those previous professors, huh? Otherwise, why are you only contacting me now? Harley delivered another merciless blow to Professor Dumbledore. How can you blame me? Professor Dumbledore's face turned bright red. I don't have the ability to break this curse on my own. I need your help, but you were too young in the past, and I'm worried about you, aren't I? Seeing that Harley seemed about to say something, Professor Dumbledore quickly stood up. Let's go, it's late, let's not waste any more time. Let's set off now. A moment later, in front of the, always awaiting, room on the 8th floor, Professor Dumbledore was carefully examining the tapestry depicting troll-beating Barnabas. What a wonderful work of art. Professor Dumbledore couldn't help but exclaim. You should say that to idiot Banaba. I don't know if he'll agree with you or if he'll want to curse you. Harley leaned against the wall next to her. And Professor, I came out with you late at night to lift the curse, not to study the murals with you. Sigh, Harley, you should be a little more lenient with an old man like me. Professor Dumbledore shook his head helplessly. You just said it was getting late and you needed to leave immediately. Professor Dumbledore seemed not to have heard Harley's last words. He stopped in front of the wall opposite the tapestry, closed his eyes, and began pacing back and forth. As Professor Dumbledore walked past for the third time, a door slowly appeared on the wall. However, this door is quite different from the door that appeared when Harley used Room of Requirement. In the past, when Harley used Room of Requirement, the doors that appeared were all ordinary wooden doors. The door that appears now is entirely sky blue, with the Hogwarts logo painted on it, and the doorknob is an eagle holding a ring in its beak. Ravenclaw's legacy, Professor Dumbledore casually explained. Based on the room's design style and the traces of magic left inside, it's not hard to tell that Room of Requirement is Ravenclaw's own masterpiece. Harley, as you know, all the previous principals of Hogwarts, after being recognized by the school's castle, could obtain principal privileges and have the right to monitor most of the school's space. And this permission comes from the Room of Requirement. As he spoke, Professor Dumbledore gently knocked on the door knocker. The eagle's beak opened and closed rapidly, and a melodious sound emanated from it. You have principal privileges, please enter. Tisk. Professor Dumbledore opened the door, his voice tinged with regret. That's the downside of being a principal. The two door knockers on the door where Ravenclaw stayed in the common room didn't ask me any questions, they just let me through. To be honest, I quite liked the questions posed by those two door knockers, they were quite interesting. Once you push open the door, the room and the outside world are like two completely different worlds. This time, the room of requirement is a forest, with a hidden path through the woods. When Ravenclaw was active, Peter the Poet had not yet been born. However, the fairy tales recorded in the tales of Peter the Poet already had their beginnings at that time. Peter's later work was simply to collect these fairy tales, process and polish them, and finally publish them as a book. Ravenclaw himself is particularly fond of these fairy tales and designed the core room of Hogwarts based on some of the plots in the fairy tales. As they spoke, the two stepped onto a wooden bridge, beneath which flowed a grey river, seemingly from the underworld. Clearly, this part of the journey imitates the legend of the three brothers. However, Harley did not sense any death in the river, only the presence of the color-changing magic and the water making magic. Finally, Professor Dumbledore was the first to stop. The two were in a clearing in the middle of the forest, with a spring in front of them. Magic spring water modeled after the Fountain of Good Fortune. Professor Dumbledore gently tapped the edge of the spring water with his wand. Of course, the legendary Lucky Spring doesn't actually bring good luck, and neither does the water in this spring. It just contains a model of Hogwarts. Before he finished speaking, countless streams of water began to rise slowly. Corridors, staircases, classrooms. Everything in Hogwarts Castle is being slowly restored, except for the professor's office, student dormitories, washrooms, and Slytherin. Besides the Chamber of Secrets, the Room of Requirement also appears in this water castle. Finally, the spring water stopped flowing, and the model was fully formed. This is just the most basic model. I can further enhance the monitoring to show the location of all creatures in the castle, including wizards, pets, and house elf. Professor Dumbledore waved his wand, and the blank spaces on the model that were originally student dormitories and professor offices were instantly filled with red dots. Of course, I have no way of knowing exactly what happened in these private places. Seeing Harley's disapproving look, he added another sentence to his own image. And the curse is here. Professor Dumbledore's wand gently pointed to the location on the lower level of the model. That used to be Professor Snape's office, but now it's shrouded in a black fog. The location of this black mist keeps changing. Defense against the dark arts, it's right there where the professor's office is. Even if this course is cancelled and a new course such as Magic Practical Principles is opened, this curse will automatically transfer to the new course. Professor Dumbledore's voice sounded rather helpless. Moreover, Tom used rather ingenious and cruel dark arts to bind this curse to his life. Unless he dies or the dark arts are broken, we cannot directly lift the curse. And you know, he has Horcrux, so. I understand. Now you think I have digested the fragments of Lord Voldemort's soul and have the dark arts talent that he has influenced. Harley pulled out wand. So you can only rely on me to break the curse, right? I'm glad you understand. Professor Dumbledore visibly relaxed. After all, this matter is somewhat dangerous, and it should be handled by an old man like me. It's a pity that I'm too old and useless, so I can only ask you for help. I'm a little embarrassed to say that. I'm much older than you. Harley muttered something in a voice so low that even Professor Dumbledore couldn't hear it, while gently tapping the surface of the spring. The water burst open instantly, and a chill quickly climbed up the spring water, corroding every corner of the Hogwarts model. The chill in the entire castle instantly intensified, as if it were about to freeze. However, this extreme phenomenon did not occur, because the walls of the castle were faintly glowing, and every portrait and every piece of worn-out armor emanated magical fluctuations. The chill was firmly contained by the magic emanating from the entire castle, and did not cause much harm. The grip of misfortune. Harley's hair had grown out of nowhere, slipping inside her pajamas and draping over the mirror at her waist. A black curse instantly filled the icy space, spreading towards the defense against the dark arts office. However, the target of these curses is not the curses that reside in the office, but rather the connection between these curses and the outside world. In Harley's eyes, these curses extended in multiple directions as transparent lines, two of them side by side connecting to the House of Malfoy's estate, and one connecting to Gringotts. There was also a cord connected to his waist, in the pocket where the undetectable extension charm had been cast. Besides these solid lines, there is also a semi-illusory line that extends towards the girls' dormitory in Gryffindor, specifically the room where Harley is located. Even though it's been corrupted by madness and curses, does it still retain the characteristics of Horcrux? A look of surprise flashed across Harley's eyes. It seems that I can still make use of that fragment of soul. The black curse instantly enveloped the 4.5 wires, easily severing them in half, replacing the curse against defense against the dark arts and the connection to those souls. Darkness Master, rest in the darkness. Harley's voice suddenly echoed in the room, becoming ethereal yet tinged with an incomprehensible silence. Professor Dumbledore, standing to the side, watched Harley's every move intently, nodding occasionally. When Harley's voice rang out, Professor Dumbledore clearly sensed an abnormal fluctuation in the surrounding environment. His attention became increasingly focused, and he even slightly raised his head. The entire room suddenly went completely dark, and before Dumbledore could even turn on the magic light, a dazzling burst of starlight exploded in the sky. Protega. Guardian Protection. Rock solid. Despite not knowing what had happened, Professor Dumbledore took a step forward and grabbed Harley, pulling him behind him. Layers of thick magic defenses surrounded the two of them, radiating light and filled with extremely powerful magic fluctuations. Professor Dumbledore was clearly very afraid that something might happen to Harley, so he was always ready to carry out a rescue. Professor, I'm all right. Harley's voice eased Professor Dumbledore's anxiety slightly. That was just a normal phenomenon when the curse is lifted, it posed no harm to me. Besides, the curse has completely disappeared now. Upon hearing this, Professor Dumbledore hesitated for a moment, then waved his wand. After confirming that the surrounding area was safe, Professor Dumbledore removed the thick magic defense. At this moment, the Hogwarts castle model in front of them returned to its original appearance as the first. The black mist that filled the castle had vanished without a trace, and the chill had been withdrawn, leaving only the clear spring water flowing gently. Professor, these curses were forcibly linked to his soul by Lord Voldemort. Meeting Professor Dumbledore's probing gaze, Harley explained quietly. So I used some of the dark arts that I was born with to guide this connection and change its direction, pointing it back to me, before finally lifting the curse. And Professor, don't worry, the removal of the curse has no effect on me whatsoever. Seeing the worry in Professor Dumbledore's eyes, Harley added. Think about it yourself, would Lord Voldemort allow the curse he himself has laid to harm him? If he dies, the curse will indeed disappear. But if the curse is destroyed first, it will have no effect on him. That's good. Professor Dumbledore nodded. Harley, thank you on Severus's behalf. After checking the room again and confirming that the curse had been completely removed, Professor Dumbledore walked out with peace of mind. Harley lagged a few steps behind him and looked the model up and down. In this model, Harley also noticed another familiar trace of magic originating from the Marauder's map. It seems that his father and Sirius came here and used special magic to connect the map with this model, which is why the Marauder's map can monitor the entire school at all times. Harley shook her head, stopped thinking about it, and walked out of the woods. During the journey, her back suddenly became ethereal, almost transparent, but then quickly returned to solidity. Opening parenthesis. End of this chapter. 388 The Golden Cup of Open Prayer. In the Black Knight magic mirror, Harley's true form is examining a crystal ball. The crystal ball was filled with black mist, which struggled incessantly, seemingly unwilling to be confined to this small space. Perhaps having grown a little bored with the game, Harley snapped her fingers lightly. The crystal ball shattered instantly, shards of glass littering the ground. Realizing this was an excellent opportunity to resist, the black mist inside immediately bared its fangs and claws and rushed out. It had developed its own vague consciousness and pounced precisely on Harley. And then, that was it. The curse stopped the moment it reached Harley. Harley merely raised her eyes slightly, her gaze unwavering. The black mist curse, like a mouse encountering a cat, instantly retreated. It pounced on a larger fragment of the crystal ball with even greater speed than when it arrived, and tried to squeeze inside. After discovering that the crystal ball had completely shattered, the curse also spiritually attempted to use its body as an adhesive to reassemble the fragments. I think this crystal ball is just the right size, the outside world really isn't for me. How interesting. They've already developed a sense of fear and even begun to possess wisdom. Harley wore a kind smile as a single hair of hers grew longer and transformed into a snake's hair. The snake's mane was raised high, and the forked tongue at the tip of its mouth trembled constantly, emitting a crisp, hissing sound. The black mist became even more terrified, shrinking into itself and daring not to show its face. Am I that scary? Harley's smile grew even brighter, but her eyes betrayed her displeasure. It seems so. All right, this kind-hearted witch can't bear to let you suffer fears that you shouldn't have to at your age. Goodbye. As soon as the words were spoken, the snake head at the tip of the snake hair swallowed it whole, as if it were eating a candy, completely absorbing the curse, and then turned back into its jet black hair. Harley herself smacked her lips in place of Medusa, as if she had just enjoyed something delicious. Riddle's idea is truly ingenious. After thoroughly tasting this long-standing curse, Harley couldn't help but exclaim in amazement. This ingenious design, through the cross-mixing of at least 4 different dark arts, curses a vague concept. Ingenious, absolutely ingenious. She snapped her fingers lightly, and 4 black spells flew from the tips of Harley's 4 hairs, striking a newly conjured white mouse. The white mouse opened its mouth, but couldn't make a sound. It then fell onto the table and stopped breathing. It worked. Harley's voice was filled with joy. However, the power is a bit too great. I still need to differentiate it in more detail. I have other things to do tonight, so I'll stop here for now. Thanks for the gift, Riddle. This curse is mine now. After studying the curse that had plagued the Hogwarts for so long, which was cast against defense against the dark arts, Harley's attention turned to the threads connecting the curse. The previous curse was just an appetizer. Even if Harley didn't get it, it would only make him feel a little regretful. In Harley's view, only these connected souls and cursed magic lines are the unexpected surprises and the real feast of the night. This strongest thread should connect to the most important fragment of Riddle's soul. Those lines were now vividly presented in Harley's hands, like a witch's toy. So, does that mean he carries a Horcrux with him? Or is his main soul so damaged that it's split in 2 within his body? This problem is worth studying. When I become the Doomsday Witch of Sequence 1, I may be able to use Riddle, who is not very useful, for a final study and let him make the most of his remaining strength. There's one last Horcrux I haven't found yet. Let me see. It turns out it's hidden in Gringotts. Harley picked up one of the solid threads and tugged at the crown attached to the end of the thread. The Ravenclaw crown remained completely unresponsive. The fragments of soul within, after a long period of experimentation, dared not even peek out. I suddenly had a bold idea. Harley looked at the solid, condensed line and the other translucent, illusory line connecting to the headboard of her dorm room, and suddenly something occurred to her. A rather wicked smile curled at the corners of her lips, and the barriers around the magic mirror slowly melted away, revealing a colorful mirror world reflecting various images. A tiny hand made of spider silk emerged from the mirror world and reached out toward the entrance to the nearest real world. A moment later, the little hand quickly withdrew, holding a small box with many intricate patterns painted on it. At the same time, the mirror world shattered, and Harley returned to the room of requirement. However, this time, the room took on a shape that belonged only to Harley. Spider silk danced in midair, and a simple altar quickly took shape. 2 long, frozen lines and 1 illusory line flew up onto the altar at the same time. The box, covered with seals, was slowly opened, and fragments of a broken soul emerged from it. An ancient Ravenclaw crown also appeared at the other end of the altar. Harley stood before the altar, fingers interlocked, eyes devout, reciting her new 3-part title after ascending to Sequence 2, Demoness of Catastrophe, becoming a complete mythical being, the noble earthly angel. A benefactor of disaster and calamity. The angel who plays the symphony of doom. The immortal returning traveler. The old Ravenclaw crown, which had been devoid of any magical energy, suddenly began to emanate magic, and a metal mouth slowly appeared. The fragments of the soul, which had been wailing and singing of madness and depravity, as well as a certain primordial witch, have now stopped their cries and grown a physical mouth. Both began to sing at the same time, reciting the same words together. The favored by disaster and calamity. Great Britain Wizarding World, Diagon Alley, the most bustling commercial street, and Gringotts, the Wizard Bank. Gringotts had already closed its doors, but the goblins were still working overtime. They are tallying up the day's harvest, calculating how much gold and galleons have been stored today. Below the main hall is the underground vault, heavily guarded and impregnable. The deepest row of vaults belonging to ancient families is even guarded by dragon. The Lestrange family vault is located here, filled with various treasures and a golden cup. This cup doesn't look particularly valuable. It has 2 handles and a badger is engraved on it. However, it was placed separately on the top shelf of the deepest part of the shelf, with the bottom of the shelf padded with the Lestrange family's golden genealogy and other precious treasures. The cup lay there quietly, motionless. Suddenly, the golden cup seemed to be stimulated by some external force, and thus woke up from its slumber. Its once dormant magic began to fluctuate wildly and spread unchecked, resisting the damage brought by the unseen Mahoutokoro. The golden cup's unrestrained magic stimulated other ancient treasures in the vicinity. In an instant, a small riot broke out in the Lestrange family's vault, with various items colliding and exploding. However, all of this was quickly quelled by the magic that the Lestrange family had arranged in advance. Only the golden cup continued to emanate magic, thereby strengthening its own resistance. However, no matter how much the golden cup resisted, it was all in vain. In less than a minute, the golden cup's resistance completely collapsed. A mouth sprouted from the cup and began to respectfully recite the name of a certain great being. A benefactor of disaster and calamity. The angel who plays the symphony of doom. The immortal returning traveler. Your believers ask you to come down here and bring us the end of all things, and the glory of eternal life in your God's kingdom. With each recitation, all the mirrors in the vault seemed to be contaminated, or rather, purified. Mouths also grew on their mirrors, and they began to chant and pray together. Suddenly, a violent surge of magical energy erupted from the largest full-length mirror, which was inlaid with jewels and gold, and a door connecting to the mirror world opened. Harley stepped out of the mirrored world and into this long silent treasure trove. The moment her bare feet touched the gold ornaments below, the ornaments emitted a sizzling sound and a burning sensation, while simultaneously replicating more fake objects. However, Harley didn't care. The high temperature, which would burn the skin of an ordinary wizard, was just an ordinary hot spring to her, not even as comfortable as a real lava hot spring. Fire spell and copy spell. Interesting. Harley lightly hooked a necklace with her toe, glanced at it, and made her judgment. The treasure vault suddenly became cold, and the ceiling seemed to connect to the South Pole. Snowflakes fell heavily, their glistening edges like blades, piercing the treasures and destroying the magic within them. Let's silence the world and listen to the sound of magic breaking down. All the treasures were transformed into solid ice sculptures by the snowflakes. When the frost disappeared, the protective spell on the treasure was completely lifted. It seems the experiment was a success. Harley looked around and nodded slightly. That's great, I successfully influenced Horcrux on the first try, making it remotely locate me. Then consider these treasures as a reward for my success. The Black Knight magic mirror flew out from Harley's waist and devoured all the treasures in the Lestrange family vault except for the golden cup. Ancient books, necklaces, suits of armor, and swords all rose into the air, mountains of gold coins vanished rapidly, and even a tiny bronze nut in the corner was not spared. After confirming that the vault had been largely emptied, Harley stepped forward and took the gold cup from the shelf. She could clearly feel that the soul inside the cup, frozen by the previous icy world, was now trembling. Dear Riddle, it seems we meet again. Harley whistled, tossed the golden cup into his pocket, and it lay there alongside the worn-out crown and the small box. Solid ice formed on the ground, slowly engulfing Harley's figure. When there was no one left in the vault, the ice quickly dissipated, the liquid evaporated, leaving only a lifeless vault. Neither the goblin patrolling outside nor the sleeping dragon noticed anything unusual about the vault, and they simply took the previous magical fluctuations as normal. After all, few of these pure-blood family members are good people, so it's normal for them to keep some contraband in their vaults that might occasionally cause trouble. As long as the money is there, Gringotts will never question anything. In the house of Malfoy's estate, beneath lies the Chamber of Secrets. Lord Voldemort sat at the table, flipping through his magic book. As for why the second page of the book lists the name of a certain ancestor of the House of Malfoy, Lord Voldemort had no idea. How could he know why his book had been inscribed with the names of the House of Malfoy's ancestors? It was good enough that he didn't demand that the House of Malfoy kneel down and apologize. As Lord Voldemort casually flipped through the book, he pondered his plans. He was very satisfied recently. The cooperation with the Saints was progressing smoothly. Dementor had agreed to return to his command. The goblins' weapons were nearing completion. Giant and Werewolf had also hidden themselves near the North Sea. In Hogwarts, although Umbridge made a foolish mistake and almost affected Severus's espionage work on the first day, he at least didn't make any more foolish mistakes during this period and was also carrying out the plan in an orderly manner. Although the struggle within the Ministry of Magic is intensifying, Fudge will not fall anytime soon, nor will it interfere with his plans. Perfect, absolutely perfect. Just as Lord Voldemort was envisioning a bright future where he would kill Harry Potter and Dumbledore and completely control the wizarding world, his soul suddenly trembled. What happened? Lord Voldemort instinctively stood up and looked in the direction of Hogwarts. He drew out his U-wand and chanted an extremely complex incantation. However, nothing unusual happened. The curse that existed in Hogwarts remained intact. Strange. Lord Voldemort frowned, a non-existent brow furrowing. Is it just my imagination? After a moment's hesitation, he began to connect with his own curse, attempting to use the power of the curse to link with Umbridge's dark mark. Everything went smoothly. The curse responded to his call and blocked Castle's own power. Lord Voldemort was then relieved, realizing that the previous strange occurrences were merely an illusion caused by the growing power of the curse. On the table, the cold black tea in the teacup was poured out and replaced with a freshly brewed cup. Lord Voldemort picked up his glass and took a sip with satisfaction, paying no attention to a house elf leaving its narrow compartment in the wall. Why should the great Dark Lord care about such weak, ant-like slaves? P.S. The original work and various sources say that Azkaban is located in the cold waters of the North Sea, so could someone with good geography knowledge please explain to the author which exactly the North Sea is? End of chapter. 389. I support all your decisions and hope you will take your talent elsewhere, thank you, Alliance Leader. The new school term is much busier than Harley imagined. After all, she is already in 5th grade this year and will be taking her first major exam in Wizarding World. For both the regular Wizard exams and the Ultimate Wizard exams, the workload for 5th and 7th grade students increases significantly. The 7th grade Wizard is a bit better, since most professors only accept students with ELS grades of E and O into their advanced classes in 6th grade. Professor Snape, for example, only accepts students with ELS grades of O. Only professors like Trelawney and Hagrid, whose overall reputation isn't great, would reluctantly accept students with A grades into their advanced classes to avoid the embarrassment of not being able to recruit enough students. Under Professor Dumbledore's leadership, Hogwarts has always implemented a fun-filled education approach, and the academic performance of the vast majority of students who have played for 5 years without much studying is naturally appalling. The vast majority of students can only get 5 or 6 certificates, and 1/3 of them will only barely pass and get an A. Students like the Weasley twins, who can get good or even excellent grades in 3 subjects, would be considered excellent children in any wizard family if not compared to their older brothers who have exceptionally high grades. In this situation, most 6th grade students will only choose 3 or 4 courses, and some members of the pure blood family will only study 1 or 2 courses, just to get a diploma and consider their mission accomplished. After all, if they can't find jobs, they'll have to go back and inherit the Diagon Alley and Nocturne Alley businesses. Therefore, even with a significant increase in the workload, the pressure is still manageable for 7th grade students. However, for 5th grade students who have been lagging behind for a long time, the significant increase in course load on top of having to take at least 9 courses is simply a nightmare for many. 5th graders who used to spend their time in the common room playing wizard chess or playing jacks are now spending large groups of time in the library. Harley initially thought this was none of her business, since she wasn't afraid of exams. Besides, even without exams, would a demoness of catastrophe need to find a job? She thought that all she needed to do was attend classes, participate in Quidditch training, and occasionally manage freshmen as a perfect, but her actual life turned out to be exceptionally fulfilling. Although the professors knew Harley's magic level, and everyone except Professor Snape exempted Harley from homework, Harley still had to attend classes. In addition, even though Hermione had already learned most of the school's curriculum, she still insisted on dragging Harley to spend time in the library, so Harley didn't have as much free time as one might imagine. With a rare weekend break, Gryffindor Quidditch team has begun selecting new players. Wood, the former Quidditch team captain and goalkeeper for Gryffindor, has graduated, and the team now needs a new goalkeeper. However, Harley was not optimistic about the selection process, since upon closer inspection, Gryffindor did not seem to have many promising Quidditch candidates. As she expected, the selection competition held on the weekend of the second week was truly a disastrous affair. Angelina first spent a lot of effort persuading the first-year Little Lions and other students from other schools to leave before the selection process could proceed smoothly. The selection process wasn't about comparing skills or who could defend the most balls, but rather about who played the least badly. The selection rules are that the Gryffindor Quidditch team sends out a chaser to throw 15 balls at a fixed point, and the participating students must try their best to stop the balls. In Harley's opinion, this requirement was as low as it could possibly be, since there's no requirement for players to be able to throw from a fixed spot on the court. However, it turned out that Angelina's selection process was correct, because the vast majority of students could only catch more than half of these fixed-point throws. When Harley was on trial with some 2nd and 3rd graders, the goalkeeper missed even the simplest straight ball, and the goalkeeper let out a surprised scream and applauded and cheered for Harley. This left Harley feeling very helpless, as he was there to assist Angelina's new players, not to hold a fan meeting. Later, some of the little wizards, after participating in the selection, even flew over on broomsticks, wobbling, and asked Harley if they could be selected. A troubled Harley could only smile and say that the little wizards were performing very well, were very talented Quidditch players, and even future Quidditch stars, and that he supported all their decisions. At the same time, Harley subtly suggested that they learn from the actions of some professional Quidditch players and take their talents to the Quidditch teams of other colleges in Miami. Oh no, I mean other colleges. In the end, Gryffindor Quidditch team had to choose the tallest among the short players, picking Ron. At least he blocked 13 of Angelina's 15 set shots. Although the process was incredibly ugly, and some balls were even caught in one's face, just tell me whether you caught them or not. Actually, Gryffindor had another guy, McClargan, who was even better at it, but McClargan was a bit mentally unstable. Before the selection, he made a bet that he ate a whole pound of fox antler eggs and ended up in the school hospital. With a brain like that, Angelina was afraid he might have a brain fart before an important competition and end up in the school hospital, so she didn't hesitate and immediately decided on Ron. The Weasley twins were naturally very embarrassed by their brother's poor performance. They patted their chests and promised to train Ron into a true Quidditch master. Seeing this, Angelina found some comfort. What if Weasley twins' special training works and they manage to draw a gold card? Even if they can't train to achieve that, Gryffindor is still considered to have high offense and low defense, and can trade points with the opponent. In addition, other academies also graduated a number of veteran players, including the captains of Ravenclaw and Slytherin, so Gryffindor's roster looks much better. After spending 2 weeks in the school hospital, Umbridge finally left. Actually, she was already cured. Although the targeted potion provided by Madame Pomfrey was bitter, it worked quickly and cured this particular curse in less than 10 seconds. However, Umbridge felt that her performance was too embarrassing and was afraid that the students would still remember her embarrassing appearance. To preserve what little dignity he had left, Umbridge brazenly stayed in the small hospital for another week until Madame Pomfrey grew impatient and left. Upon returning to work, she immediately changed her strategy. Hogwarts, regular teachers are clearly not to be trifled with. After all, they were former potion class instructors. If the professors are this good, the professors for the spell and transfiguration courses must be even better. And the current potions professor Slughorn was my former dean, and more importantly, he had many students and acquaintances in the Ministry of Magic, so I definitely couldn't afford to mess with him. Professor Sprout, a herbalist, seemed unassuming, and the Hogwarts little badgers were generally harmless, so they were quickly overlooked by Umbridge. Therefore, Umbridge chose to focus its attention on elective professors, as it was possible to try to complete tasks from both the old and new professors at the same time. Starting from the third week, Umbridge was frequently seen in the classrooms of those 5 elective courses. In the Ancient Runes class, Umbridge only made one appearance before being kicked out. She had just appeared at the classroom door that day when she suddenly remembered something urgent and hurriedly left. She never came to that classroom again after that. The students in class were baffled, while Harley marveled at Professor Babbling's ingenious use of mental magic. It seems that this old vampire wasn't just freeloading off the school board's galleon and drinking free dragon blood during his time at Hogwarts. With her overall strength, she is definitely at the level of a 4th-order demigod vampire count, which is the Witch King of the Moon Path. The professors, however, lacked the necessary expertise for the remaining 4 elective courses, and thus had to undergo review by Umbridge. During the third week's divination class, as soon as Harley entered the classroom, she sensed that something was off about the atmosphere. Normally, before class, the classroom is dimly lit, the curtains are closed, and only a few candles are burning slowly. Professor Trelawney would hide in a corner of the classroom. Of course, this corner usually referred to her comfortable recliner. Professor Trelawney always claimed that he was actually traveling in his mind, opening his third eye, and using his spirituality to collide with those prophetic dreams in order to obtain prophecies and predict good and bad fortune. The dark environment was to allow her soul to connect with the spiritual world as much as possible, and she lay there to keep her body as far away from the material world floor as possible, so as not to defile the purity of her third eye. However, apart from a few die-hard fans of Professor Trelawney, everyone else agreed that Professor Trelawney was just sleeping. After all, you're already snoring. If a student calls you and you then say you weren't snoring, it just doesn't seem convincing, does it? But today, Professor Trelawney, for the first time ever, stood on the floor of the material world, and even walked around from time to time, his expression as if he were constipated. The emerald and agate necklaces around her neck and wrists kept clinking together, making a sound like pebbles striking each other. The curtains had already been drawn open, and the afternoon sunlight shone in, dispelling the dampness in the room that was called spiritual perception. Harley was still wondering about Professor Trelawney's unusual behavior when Susan, who had climbed up to the attic with him, nudged her in the side. Oh, so Umbridge was sitting at the last table taking the lecture. Never mind then. Harley blinked, strode over, and deliberately chose to sit very close to Umbridge. When Umbridge looked up and saw Harley sitting next to him, he was a little surprised, but still gave her a shy and friendly smile. This was really hard for Susan, who had come with Harley, to bear. However, she couldn't bear to part with Harley, the strongest student in the class, so she could only reluctantly sit down and try her best not to look at Umbridge. "Good afternoon, Ms. Umbridge." Harley did not deliberately avoid the topic, in fact, she took the initiative to greet her. Although Harley is a typical person who is attracted to good looks, he has seen many strange and extraordinary creatures, so he can be kind to the toad's ugliness. "Good afternoon, Miss Potter." Umbridge was clearly surprised that Harley greeted him, but the smile on his face became even sweeter. Seeing that Umbridge could even conceal his true feelings so well, Harley's lips curled up slightly, revealing a devilish smile. "Ms. Umbridge, there are still a few minutes before class starts. May I ask you some questions?" Of course." Harley's smile widened. "Ms. Umbridge, what are your thoughts on the recent Wizarding World newspaper? Could you please share your opinion in your capacity as Senior Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Magic?" Harley deliberately emphasized the words, Senior Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Magic, her face full of curiosity. Umbridge's smile froze instantly, and he almost swore. "You ask me what I think. I think it's. Are you deliberately picking a fight?" Recently, the Daily Prophet has been getting a lot of traffic. First, Rita, relying on her exclusive interview with Harley, wrote a series of articles, including 100 little-known details about Harley Potter killing Lord Voldemort, and One Man Beats Through the International Wizarding Duel Competition, Why Harley Potter is a God, which were then serialized in newspapers. Although Harley himself was unaware of the finesse in some of his actions, it didn't stop Rita from enthusiastically praising it. While other reporters missed out on the biggest wave of media attention, the internal power struggles within Wizarding World were certainly entertaining. Wizengamot recently launched a second impeachment against Fudge, and this time, the Pure Blood family is much less inclined to defend him. It is anticipated that Fudge may be forced to step down completely around Easter. Reporters naturally wouldn't let such a big story slip by, and once again launched a frenzy of sharing the spoils in their newspapers. Given this newspaper's public opinion environment, how can Umbridge, a party known for its outspokenness, possibly view the situation? She has already found a new patron, but the new patron has a terrible reputation and it's inconvenient to talk about it, so Umbridge can't abandon Fudge yet. Harley's problem now is simply to fix her unattractive appearance, isn't it? "Well, Miss Potter, I don't have any particular opinion on the recent newspapers." Umbridge organized his thoughts. Well, I think, cough cough cough. The timely school bell cured Umbridge's persistent cough, and she quickly sat up straight. Just as she was about to speak, she realized that Harley had already turned her head away. 390 This is the Master's mission. The school bell finally rang, which relieved Umbridge, but he was also a little annoyed. Harley turned back so decisively that it was clear she had no intention of getting an answer from him. What about her previous actions? Weren't they just fooling herself? This intensified Umbridge's hatred for Harley. After all, she was a petty and narrow-minded person. However, Umbridge couldn't lash out yet, so he could only keep a smile plastered on his face. Professor Trelawney and Umbridge, who were standing at the front of the classroom, had the opposite feeling. She genuinely thought Harley was a good student and that her efforts had not been in vain. Although Harley lacked spirituality, had no talent for divination, and submitted assignments that were impractical, did not conform to the textbook, and lacked the spiritual brilliance possessed by a diviner like myself with a third eye and insightful vision. However, he never gave up on Harley and continued to, carefully, teach her. Although he was also envious of Harley's reputation and wanted to use her to get into the divination class to attract more students, let's just say he didn't give up. Now, without communicating with her at all, Harley took the initiative to hold off Umbridge, preventing her from continuing to pressure her with her gaze and giving her valuable pre-class thinking time. Of course, Trelawney the professor wasn't asking for extra time from the students because he hadn't prepared his lesson, he was just a little afraid of this vicious witch nitpicking. After all, divination has always emphasized that one's appearance reflects one's inner state. Umbridge is so ugly, he must be a jealous and scumbag who would deliberately make things difficult for and target talented people like him. Now Harley has held back Umbridge, giving Trelawney. The professor gained valuable preparation time. Trelawney the professor was naturally extremely grateful. However, once the class actually started, Professor Trelawney was still a little nervous and couldn't help but tighten the shawl wrapped around her with her slightly trembling hands. Today we will continue with what we learned in the last lesson. Professor Trelawney bravely maintained his usual enigmatic tone, and learn about prophetic dreams. Please work in pairs and, based on the explanations in the Dream Interpretation Guide textbook, interpret one of your partner's dreams. During this time, I will make rounds and answer your questions. The students nodded and opened their books, which made Professor Trelawney's expression soften a bit. So I still don't understand, Susan said, opening her textbook as she lowered her voice as much as possible. Even if the old swindler's claim is true, dreams may be a mental response to changes we perceive in the world around us. But what can we glean from a fixed textbook? That's a question for you to answer. Harley grinned mischievously, raising her hand in a suggestive gesture. It seems you've forgotten why you came to the divination class in the first place. Susan lowered her head and thought for a few seconds before suddenly realizing what was going on. Yeah, I chose this course just to get credits by following that old liar Terry Lonnie. What does the true nature of the divination class have to do with me? Will it be used to judge my translation assignment and result in AP? You're right, I completely forgot something so important. Susan casually fiddled with her textbook. Then just make up any dream you have, just fool me. The old liar is coming soon. As the students began interpreting the dream, Umbridge stood up from his seat and walked around the classroom, asking the students questions from time to time. However, she seemed to have something on her mind, so she deliberately distanced herself from Harley and turned to Trelawney. The professor was located nearby. Professor Trelawney noticed the pink toad approaching, so he deliberately started a teaching dispute with two boys from Gryffindor. Ron and Dean disagreed with Professor Trelawney on their interpretation of the dream. Ron said he had a dream last night in which he became the goalkeeper for Gryffindor Quidditch team and saved all of the opponent's goals in his first game. Moreover, time flew by, and he firmly guarded Gryffindor's goal, preventing anyone from scoring a single point. Ron firmly believes that this was a prophetic dream, proving that he is destined for success. However, Professor Trelawney disagrees, stating that Jupiter was astrologically far from Saturn last night. Therefore, the interpretation of this dream should also align with the imagery of foreknowledge, and be interpreted in the opposite direction. The correct interpretation should be that Ron will inevitably become the new generation of Civ in the next game, letting 11 out of 10 goals pass by, one of which was a mistake when he kicked the ball in the wrong direction, scoring into his own net. She also criticized Ron and Dean for not being able to integrate the astrological and divination knowledge she had previously taught. I clearly said this in the first half of this year, but they've already forgotten it all. Shivering and cold, when will divination class finally stand up again? Of course, when reprimanding Ron, Professor Trelawney's voice was incredibly confident, as if Umbridge were there. After all, she had secretly seen the Weasley twins giving Ron special training through the cracks in the tower window yesterday. That scene, tisk tisk tisk, even Trelawney, who doesn't understand Quidditch, could see that Ron's skill level was utterly appalling. This is why Professor Trelawney dared to make a prediction in front of Umbridge. After all, she added a qualifier, the next game. With Ron's skill level, how could he have improved before the first game? Professor Trelawney openly expressed his disbelief, saying he'd be better off believing he was Merlin himself. Trelawney Professor's divination infuriated Ron. It was a blatant slander against his character. If you can't speak, it's best not to. Nobody will think you're mute. Is this your prediction? Umbridge suddenly leaned in and asked in an affected, high-pitched voice. But your explanation seems completely different from the textbook, Trelawney Professor. Do you think there's a mistake in the textbook? Or is it that there's a problem with your own understanding of divination? Why doesn't Hogwarts just ask his students to learn divination from the textbook, instead of hiring me, a famous diviner? Faced with Umbridge's relentless pressure, Professor Trelawney couldn't help but take a step back and offer a rebuttal. I already said, we need to learn to apply what we've learned to reality. She tried to suppress her agitated emotions and explained in the coolest possible tone, like the astrological knowledge I mentioned earlier. Trelawney the professor frantically searched for a replacement, while Harley, who was dealing with Susan in the distance and observing the commotion, almost burst out laughing. Isn't what Professor Trelawney said just taking advantage of Umbridge being an outsider? They can't even be bothered to write something decent. However, Umbridge believed it to some extent, since Professor Trelawney's statement seemed very rigorous. Professor Trelawney, you seem to have a great deal of knowledge and experience, is that right? After Professor Trelawney finished explaining his interpretation of dreams, Umbridge said with a smile. Terry Lonnie glared at her, crossed his arms, and shrugged, seemingly in protest against Umbridge's questioning. Of course, she said confidently, I've been in this position for a full 16 years. Think about it yourself, if I didn't have real talent and ability, would Professor Dumbledore have hired me? Umbridge's smile deepened, and he jotted down a few notes in his notebook. Professor Dumbledore personally hired you. Absolutely genuine. Only someone with his discerning eye could see what makes me special. I've heard that your grandmother is the renowned prophet Cassandra Trelawney of the wizarding world. It's my great-great-grandmother, thank you, Professor Trelawney corrected. I am her great-great-granddaughter, and the second person in the Trelawney family to inherit the Wizard of the Heavenly Eye. The second one. Umbridge's voice held a hint of doubt. Trelawney suddenly realized that something was wrong with his words and felt a little uneasy, but he still forced a calm expression on his face. The Heavenly Eye often awakens across generations. It's normal for it to skip 3 generations. After all, a certain divination book says that magic gives birth to 1, 1 gives birth to 2, 2 gives birth to 3, and 3 gives birth to all things, so the inheritance that skips 3 generations is the most magical. As he spoke, Trelawney waved his wand, and a tattered book flew over from a short distance away. Harley, with her sharp eyes, noticed that the book was titled, The Scripture of Ethics, and the author's name was quite strange. At the bottom of the book, there is also a line of Chinese characters printed. This book was translated by Bell Magazine. If Harley remembers correctly, Wizarding World doesn't exist as a magazine, and Bell Magazine isn't one of the major magazines in the Muggle world either. The case is solved. Trelawney probably got a translated second-hand copy of the Muggle book from somewhere and used it to fool Umbridge. Umbridge was not easily intimidated and continued his question and answer session with Trelawney. Umbridge's questions became increasingly pointed, while Trelawney's responses became increasingly flustered. This meant that while the smile on Umbridge's face remained, the meaning behind it had changed, seemingly revealing some dissatisfaction and disappointment. Harley shook her head. She knew why Umbridge was reacting that way. After all, this is the Master's task. On the first weekend night, Harley was conscripted by Professor Dumbledore to work inhumane overtime hours late into the night. After the curse that had existed in Hogwarts for so long was cleared, the connection between the curse and Lord Voldemort was not severed. Instead, Harley naturally took over the connection and linked it to the curse he had created. So when Umbridge used dark arts to link the curse, attempting to use the power of the curse to evade Professor Dumbledore. When principal access was being monitored and contact was being made with its new owner, magic connected to Harley. Harley is a talented and virtuous witch of the new era. She is beautiful inside and out, always willing to help others, so she naturally wouldn't be stingy with her power. Of course, given Harley's kind nature, it's only natural that she would charge a small fee for helping her block principal access monitoring. Thus, Harley easily witnessed the magical exchanges between Umbridge and Lord Voldemort that Dobby couldn't overhear. Based on the information available, Umbridge's visit to Hogwarts was not merely to complete Fudge's task and maintain Fudge's trust, but also to satisfy Lord Voldemort's curiosity. Lord Voldemort was obsessed with some unknown prophecy during the summer holidays, a fact that Dobby had already reported to Harley. There are 2 ways to obtain the prophecy, one of which is to infiltrate the British Ministry of Magic. The Department of Mysteries, Hall of Prophecy. A peculiar phenomenon exists in the wizarding world. When each prophecy is generated, a corresponding crystal ball automatically forms in the prophecy hall. This isn't some kind of magic performed by the Department of Mysteries, even the unspeakables in the Department of Mysteries don't have such power. Like the door in the Death Chamber, these crystal balls existed before the Department of Mysteries was established. These crystal balls containing prophecies are extremely mysterious, only the figures mentioned in the prophecies can understand their contents. As for others, even if they obtain the crystal ball, they will not be able to unlock its secrets. If they try to forcibly acquire it, they will be devoured or killed by unknown forces. Since the establishment of the Hall of Prophecy, many magic masters have been curious about the mysteries of this place, but unfortunately, they have not been able to crack them to this day. Harley already knew about this, but considering that the Department of Mysteries comprises 12 halls, including the Death Chamber and the Hall of Prophecy, and that the City of Calamity is hidden behind the door in the center of the Death Chamber. Given its parallel to the Death Chamber and its bizarre nature, Harley absolutely refused to believe that the Hall of Prophecy was merely a remnant of an extraordinary trait left behind by a Sequence 9 diviner. Therefore, Harley had no curiosity about the Hall of Prophecy, at least not before becoming the Sequence 1 Doomsday Witch. She wasn't even willing to do a divination to find out the specific content of the prophecy or its whereabouts, since no matter how much risk she tried to avoid, the traces of the prophecy hall would inevitably appear in the divination, and it might even be connected to the City of Calamity. Curiosity kills, and witches who have lived long enough know how to survive in a dangerous world. As for Lord Voldemort, Harley could only sincerely wish him good luck. After all, she still had his Horcrux, bearing his mark. Even if he dies, he can create a fake Lord Voldemort to lead the Death Eaters and dark creatures in his place and complete the Ascension ritual. Whether Lord Voldemort is alive or dead is not important, what matters is that the Death Eaters believe he is alive. Besides going to the Prophecy Hall, another feasible way to obtain prophecies is through divination. Lord Voldemort planned to use two methods simultaneously. On the one hand, he instructed the Death Eaters to carry out their plan to infiltrate the Department of Mysteries, and on the other hand, he had Umbridge try it out through Trelawney. If Trelawney really was a fortune teller and redrew the prophecy, Lord Voldemort thought he would have hit the jackpot. If she doesn't get the divination right, it doesn't matter. She can use the excuse that Trelawney is a fraud to expel him from Hogwarts, thus allowing Umbridge to further gain Fudge's trust. Lord Voldemort described Fudge as a very important sacrifice, and he demanded that Umbridge absolutely not fall out with Fudge, at least not before Christmas. In conclusion, regardless of whether Trelawney has real ability or not, Lord Voldemort's move was not a loss. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.